Hello and welcome to VR Download. You may notice that it's just me this week. Neither Ian nor Kyle are available today, and I'm quite swamped, but I thought it would be good to come in and have a quick VR download instead of skipping. And so we'll just kind of run through the week's news and discuss it as usual, but it probably will not be anywhere near as long an episode, but we didn't want to leave you with nothing to listen to at this time on a Thursday. So if everyone in the chat can let me know whether you can hear me, that would be great. Running on a slightly different setup today. Thank you so much to all of our UploadVR members, both on the website and on YouTube, as well as, of course, our website patrons, and that is XR Developer News, Podum from Smash Drums, HoloNet, Mike Manzano, Richard Meller, Parmesan, and Qubits. Thank you all so much. Your contributions and help really means the world to us. So we do have, let's see, a total of 9 or so topics today. We're going to talk about prices first. So Sony raising the price of the PlayStation 5 console itself, Meta cutting the price of Quest 3S for the next 2 weeks, a $30 discount there. We'll then get into the controversial minefield topic of tariffs, the new update being, of course, Trump exempting many kinds of electronics from the reciprocal tariffs, while still there being many questions there about what may happen in future, as well as a Trump cabinet member coming out and saying that this is only a temporary exemption, though not really giving any details. So still a lot of uncertainty there, but a little bit of potentially good news. We'll get into that while trying not to be too political in any way. We'll then talk about PlayStation VR 2 on PC. As many of you will know, it's missing its standout features, but every month now developers are getting more and more of those features hacked in on PC. So back in September, it was the adaptive triggers. Earlier this month, it was eye tracking. Now it's high dynamic range, at least partially. We'll dig into what I mean by partially there later in the show. We'll then discuss the launch of Nvidia's RTX 5060 family, the budget, low-end PC gaming GPUs that could allow some people who are on a very strict budget to get into PC VR, even though we would recommend going for higher-end cards for a lot of PC VR experiences. We will then briefly discuss Rec, which is a new idea to let you pilot fighting robots using VR headsets. So it's going to be a VR game where you're piloting a robot that's fighting, and then the best players will be brought in to pilot real humanoid robots who are fighting. So you may have seen humanoid robots piloted by VR headsets. This is taking that to a very interesting sort of entertainment angle rather than productivity or anything like that. We'll then discuss the comments of James Cameron, who recently announced a partnership with Meta, who kind of waxed lyrical actually about how great the current headsets are, like Quest 3 and Vision Pro, for watching 3D movies. And he's excited because he's been a huge fan of 3D for decades now. But most cinemas suck for 3D for reasons that we'll get into later in the show. And he's amazed to see, wow, these are consumer products that people can actually buy and in their home see these 3D movies the way they're meant to be seen. And he's really excited that that's going to be something that millions of people are going to have access to very soon. We'll then briefly discuss one aspect of a game. This is VR Download. It's not our game show, so we don't go into the details of gameplay or game mechanics or game design, but I do want to just note Demeo's update on Apple Vision Pro, because they've added support for both mixed reality and eye-tracked foveated rendering, and the result is that whereas when Demeo first launched on Vision Pro, it was the worst Vision Pro game, arguably, or one of the worst of the actual big, full-fledged studio titles, and now it's one of the best. And it's an example, as we'll dig into, of how getting the technical aspects right can make or break a game in VR in a way that doesn't really apply to flat screen. Finally, our final topic will be Apple Vision Pro 2. So we have a report from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who has been very accurate in the past, saying that Apple is readying 2 new Vision headsets, a Vision Pro successor and a Mac tethered headset that is designed, specifically around Mac Virtual Display, perhaps orientated towards enterprise. And this comes as we've seen a leak that may show the battery cable and may have details about the color of the design of Vision Pro 2. So some interesting topics. So looking at the comments here, we have all of our usuals: Anthony, Casey, Chief Productions, Onakazi, James O'Loughlin, John Burbeck, Caleb of NYC, Anthony Mann, Achieveros, Desert Mesa, Parzival, Arlen Kunder, Denver Miller. Sorry, the rendering resolution is going slightly off here. Not Suspicious, and others. Thank you all for being here. And we'll try to keep this as interactive as possible, since it is quite strange for me to actually just be speaking to myself without anyone, speaking here on audio. Not really something I've done before, but we're going to work this out. So let's start by talking about the PlayStation 5 console price increase. This isn't obviously something that is directly VR, but it is highly relevant to people who are looking to get into VR in the context of console VR, PlayStation VR. So Sony recently obviously decreased the price of the PlayStation VR 2 headset, which is great. It was $550, now it's $400. But so soon after, they're now increasing the price of the console in Europe and Australasia, not the United States yet, which is very interesting in the context of tariffs. So Sony is blaming these price increases on a challenging economic environment, including high inflation and fluctuating exchange rates. But some people are speculating that the idea here is that by increasing prices in other regions, they can kind of absorb price increases, cost increases, I should say, in the US. That is speculation, of course. Sony has not confirmed anything like that. So the kind of price increases we're talking about here is that, in Europe, the PS5 digital edition without the disc drive has gone from €450 to €500. In the UK, it went from $390 to $430. In Australia, it is up to it's up to 830 Australian dollars. These are not enormous increases, but they are notable, and console buyers are especially price sensitive. So this is kind of the first time we've seen any direct price increase that may or may not be related to the current economic situations. So I just wanted to note this one. There's not much to really discuss here. Again, it is greatly overshadowed by the fact that the PlayStation VR 2 headset itself has gone down in price. So I think the biggest audience still for PSVR 2 is people who already own a PS5. So I would doubt there are many people that are going out and buying a PS5 just for PlayStation VR 2. But if you have one, especially if you got it years ago and you're getting a bit bored with flat screen, and now you see PSVR 2 is down to 400, I think we are seeing a lot of people jump in. And we're hearing from developers more and more that they're seeing increases in their PSVR 2 user base after that price cut. The price really does matter. So our next price story, if I can find it here, is the opposite direction. So for the next 2 weeks, specifically until 8:59 p.m. Pacific time on April 26th, Quest 3S is on discount for $270. So it's $30 off. And there are similar discounts in the rest of the world. In the UK, for example, it's £25 off. In Canada, it's 45 Canadian dollars off. And in Europe, it's €30 off. So that's just for 2 weeks. Meta's kind of suggesting this is a spring sale. Of course, there will be some speculation about, is this trying to move units before electronics tariffs may return, or other economic issues that are kind of secondary effects of the current political turmoil may kick in. But from a consumer's perspective, $270 is a pretty crazy price for what this is. Like, if you'd told someone 10 years ago that you would get, a headset with 6-off positional tracking that's completely standalone, has roughly the same computing power as a Oculus Rift min-spec PC from 2016, min-spec to be clear, not rec-spec, has tracked controllers that have no rings, hand tracking, color pass-through mixed reality, all of this for $270, that would have sounded crazy back then. And we almost don't appreciate the kind of price value that you get now. And to be clear, just like all other Quest 3S purchases until I think either the end of April or the end of May, this still comes with Batman Arkham Shadow and 3 months of Quest Plus. I've said over and over again on this show that Quest Plus is being underappreciated when it comes to industry analysis, in the sense of the effect it's having potentially on purchasing. Getting 3 months of free access to some of the best VR apps and games on the platform is a pretty crazy deal. And so when you can include that with Batman, I'm not surprised that for the first few months you don't really see many purchases from Quest 3S users, because they get so much for free. It is actually ridiculous, the value. If you summed the value of all the VR games there, plus Batman Arkham Shadow, like, would that get to $270? That's something we should actually look into. What happens if you sum the value of all the Quest Plus games that you get for 3 months plus Batman Arkham Shadow? If obviously that implies the hypothetical scenario that you're going to buy all these exact games anyway, but it's an interesting value comparison nonetheless. Let's have a look at some of the comments here. Anthony pointing out that Oculus Go adjusted for inflation would be worth about $250 today. So this is actually like the same price as Oculus Go for something that's dramatically more capable, but interestingly uses the exact same lenses. John Burbeck pointing out that Carmack is often talked about cheaper, faster, better. He didn't want to add any more features. He just wanted to take the Quest 2 and make it kind of cheaper and faster. And other than the mixed reality, which Carmack isn't a fan of having in the lowest end products, the Quest 3S pretty much is the Carmack headset, right? Like if you were to just, take out the mixed reality aspect, that is kind of what he wanted to push forward on. He was a big opponent of Quest Pro, which is quite ironic, right? You get this idea sometimes for people in the community that John Carmack was like the big PC VR guy. Completely false. Like he wanted the cheapest mobile headsets possible. He was Mr. Gear VR, Mr. Oculus Go. If anything, he went too low, right? He didn't think the track controllers were important. So we often talk about what Carmack got right, and he gets a lot right, but that was a crazy thing he got wrong. He thought that people would just want to sit and use a gamepad on a spinning chair specifically, though. He never liked the idea of the tether. James O'Loughlin pointing out that the hand tracking and pass-through 10 years ago in a standalone would have surprised, to say that in 10 years we'll have this in a standalone headset. It is crazy that we kind of don't appreciate what we have in some ways, but of course it does also need to get better. So Wobble pointing out that Carmack's all other priority that is not delivered in Quest 3S is lighter. So he wants it to be lighter. There's been no meaningful change in weight from Quest 2 to Quest 3S. They are roughly the same weight. And while in Quest 3, while it's the same weight, it's thinner. So you get a kind of lower moment of inertia. So even though it's the same weight, it actually feels lighter on your head. Quest 3S doesn't really have that. It's a little bit like slimmer than Quest 2, but not meaningfully. There's kind of a trick that Meta has done where they've kind of just put more of the depth into the facial interface than the actual front box there. So let's see what our next topic is here. What fun. The next topic is the tariffs. So we talked about this before when they were announced. So much has changed over time. This is one of those situations that it's difficult to form any view or opinion or analysis. And even the markets are finding that, right? Because things change by the day. Even on the day that those reciprocal tariffs were supposed to go into effect, we first talked about them a few weeks ago of how they were supposed to be, like 46% on Vietnam and 54% on China. Well, on that exact same day, everything changed, right? So the Vietnam one was taken down to 10% for the next 90 days. The China one went up to 145% and now even higher for some things. So that was even on the same day. And then by the weekend, though, very, very late on Friday night, we saw a very interesting development, which is that many classes of electronic devices were exempted from the reciprocal tariffs enacted by executive order. So this covered smartphones, tablets, laptops, and more. And interestingly, one of the exempted codes, the HTS, harmonized tariff codes, is 8528.52, which, according to a US customs ruling and sources familiar with importing VR headsets to the US, applies to VR headsets. Now, there is one caveat here. There is active debate about whether you would class a VR headset essentially as a monitor, which is this code, or as a video game console, which is a different code. And what a lot of video game sites rightly pointed out is that video games were not exempted. It's an area of debate whether this was an intentional decision or an oversight. It looks like it may have been an oversight, but depending on how you categorize it, standalone headsets either could or couldn't be. For sure, PC VR tethered headsets and PlayStation VR 2 would be exempted because they, under these tariff codes, are definitely considered to be the specific type of monitor. Like it's very archaic language. This was all designed decades ago, but it's monitors and projectors not incorporating television reception apparatus capable of directly connecting to and designed for use with an automatic data processing machine. How bizarre. But, we have seen import logs that show multiple standalone VR headsets being classed as that former category, that monitor category, which would be exempted from the reciprocal tariffs. Now, that doesn't mean that they're exempted from all tariffs. President Trump did earlier in the year, before all of this reciprocal tariff stuff, apply a 20% tariff to everything from China. That was, according to him, this is his justification, supposed to be as a tool to pressure China to do more about importing fentanyl and such like that. So it was kind of not about trade directly, but a tool to achieve other political goals. So that 20% tariff that was applied earlier in the year, it started at 10% very early in the year and then went another 10% a few months later. That still applies from China. But what we should kind of note here is that Vietnam will now kind of be exempt under those classes of electronics. So right now, there shouldn't be any new tariffs that weren't there before this year on Vietnam. And Vietnam is where Meta has moved much of its Quest headset production over the past 2 years. There's actually been, and we reported on this, an enormous move, an enormous project inside Meta to move a lot of their Quest headset production to Vietnam, specifically to hedge against the possibility of a trade war with China. So for Meta specifically, they may be able to avoid much of the difficulties that are specifically focused on China by that. However, other companies will not be able to do so. Apple Vision Pro, for example, is made in China. We don't know what Vision Pro 2, which we'll talk about later in the show, may be made. The other thing is, even if a headset is made in the United States, these tariffs don't just apply to final products, they apply to components. So Big Screen Beyond 2, for example, the tariffs on China before electronics were exempted would have applied to them. And there may still be some classes of electronics that are part of their components that are still. But as far as we understand, a lot of electronics, a huge percent of electronics, are no longer being tariffed. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Again, this is a really difficult situation. We don't want to get into politics. I'm just trying to report this because it's directly relevant to headset prices, which are one of the key crucial parts of the industry. We say over and over again on this podcast, price matters. And I want to, again, thank everyone in the comments for keeping this civil and not turning this into a kind of party political thing. Having a look at the comments here, seeing what people are saying. Yeah, Brandon Jones is saying the reasoning that US officials have been given for tariffs has been all over the map. It's probably best not to try to contextualize these changes with an explanation given by any given spokesperson. That is very valid. That is why we're very careful to say, this reason has been given on occasion. We're not in the minds of any of the people in the Trump administration. At the end of the day, unless you have a mind reading device and you're in the White House, you're not going to know exactly what the reasons behind these things are. Perhaps people have different speculative reasons. All we can say is what is actually happening and how they've been described. For now, though, it is a massive reassurance that these classes of electronics have been exempted. But this brings me to the next part of the story, which was that just a few days later, you have someone in the Trump administration saying on the news, which is crazy, in the middle of an interview, not as part of an official presentation, that these exemptions are temporary and that they intend to apply sector-specific tariffs to electronics sometime in the coming months. So we have no idea what that percentage will be, nor when it will come in. What I expect to happen, given these comments and the uncertainty, is that in this period now, where the only tariff applied to these electronics is the 20% tariff that was already there before this all blew up in the news, companies will be bringing in a lot of headsets and warehousing them in the United States. So this is something that was already happening even before the tariff was set to come in, that 54% on China and 46% on Vietnam that was coming. These companies bring a ton of these headsets in. And this happens anywhere, right? Even before these tariffs, even years ago, companies warehouse enormous stock. They don't just bring these things in and your headset that you bought on Amazon US didn't come from China a few days before or Vietnam. It came months ago and was warehoused up. So even when tariffs do come in, you're not going to get instantaneous price increases. Companies are just going to be kind of sweating and hoping that their stock gets depleted. Doesn't get depleted by the time that the tariffs go away, if they ever do. So I expect to see Meta shipping a lot of units in, and I expect them to push even harder on moving their manufacturing to Vietnam. And that's what a lot of companies have been doing. Although, again, we don't know what the administration is going to do in the United States. At any time, they could pop up and say, Vietnam is the new country that's getting tariff to hell. So I would just underscore that this is an extremely unpredictable situation. I don't think whatever political view you have, I think you could agree that the current US administration is not predictable. And so we don't know what's going to happen, but what we can say for certain is that just for now, this electronics category is exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, which is a good thing in the short term, but we don't know what's going to happen in the long term. Seeing some speculation about how this might affect Deckard. Valve famously has done a lot of their manufacturing in the United States, but of course, the components that they bring in would still be affected by any tariffs that are there at the time that Valve Deckard gets released. Arlen Kundert is saying that even with electronics being exempted, don't forget the rest of the world economy will have knock-on effects. Of course, there are indirect effects of all of this that will bring up prices. And so that's something that we really do need to take into account. I've seen that Big Screen Beyond 2, Big Screen has kind of announced that they will keep their price regardless of tariffs, although that announcement came after the exemption and didn't mention it, which I thought was a little strange. It was on a Saturday, a couple of hours after the exemption, kind of bravely come out and say we are going to absorb any tariff increases. We'll see how that plays out in future months, but that's going to be very good news for people who have pre-ordered Big Screen Beyond 2, as before this exemption news and before Big Screen's announcement, there was a lot of uncertainty there about will the Big Screen Beyond 2 pre-order price hold, or will they have to come in with some sort of price increase there. So I think we've covered this as much as we need to. Again, very evolving situation, very controversial stuff, very uncertain times for not just our industry, of course, that's what we're covering, but of course for the global economy in general. But let's move on to our next topic. This is PlayStation VR 2 on PC. So many of you will know that PlayStation VR 2 is supported on PC officially by Sony since last August through Sony's official Steam VR driver. However, that Steam VR driver from Sony is missing the headset's standout features. Pretty much all of the headset's standout features. In fact, eye tracking, high dynamic range, headset rumble, and adaptive triggers. They're all not there in Sony's driver. So what we've seen over the past 6 months or so is developers working really hard to do it themselves, to bring these features manually through kind of hacks and other techniques into PSVR 2 on PC. In September, the first thing we saw was that the developer of Cactus Cowboy, a VR game, managed to get the adaptive triggers working. and that's great. However, it relied on a paid application that you have to get. So you're not going to see that widely adopted. Those adaptive triggers are really interesting. If you haven't tried a PlayStation 5 controller or a PSVR 2 controller, they have kind of resistive triggers that can actually resist your finger movement and make it more difficult or less difficult to squeeze, which is a great haptic addition that I imagine Sony has patented, but if they haven't, or if there's any way for other companies to get license that patent, it would be great to see come throughout the industry. Now, earlier this month, as we reported on the podcast and on UploadVR.com, a developer got eye tracking working. They have managed to get eye tracking working on PC, on PSVR 2, the biggest feature I think that most people wanted, because that, of course, allows you to drive your avatar eyes in VR chat, as well as do eye-tracked foveated rendering in supported applications like Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 soon, and DCS already. So they're working on this project that they call Driver X, which is kind of a mod extension of Sony's driver, and they plan to open source release it later this year, potentially quite soon. And so they actually have a team of people now working, of just, enthusiasts who are, very experienced programmers who are working away to try to bring these features. And the new information here is that this team has now managed to get high dynamic range partially working. So the person who got eye tracking working goes by the handle of What the Hopper, and the person who got HDR working now partially is Hecky. So why do I keep saying partially? Because there are two main components to HDR, high dynamic range. There's two things that make HDR compared to SDR, which is regular screens, regular output. And those two things are wider color gamut and greater range of luminance. Wider color gamut, wider range of colors, greater range of luminance. As in the same scene can show a wider range of colors. The same scene can show really, really, really dark and really, really, really bright. So these are obviously aspects of hardware, and the PlayStation VR 2's displays are HDR, but you also need the software stack to support this. And that's every single aspect of the software stack has to support HDR. And so what Hecky has managed to get working here is 10-bit color depth, the wider color gamut part of HDR. What they haven't got working is the greater range of luminance. And there's a reason for that. SteamVR doesn't support it. SteamVR does support 10-bit color depth. However, it does not support PQ, perceptual quantizer, which is the technology that is needed for the greater range of luminance. So another major caveat here is that developers will need to support this in each VR game. So even for that 10-bit color depth, the wider color gamut that Hecky has gotten working, each individual PC VR title will have to update to support it. So we don't really expect to see this widely done. It's really amazing that they got this working. Don't get me wrong. Really good work by Hecky. Well done. And for people who want to kind of have their own projects or whatever, if you're using this as like an enterprise headset, you can get this working. Maybe some developers that are, super enthusiastic in the community will do it. But until we see like a lot of headsets on SteamVR, a huge percentage of headsets on SteamVR support high dynamic range, I don't think we're going to see many developers bother. If Deckard supports it, I'm sure Valve will push there. I'm sure we'll get PQ supported in SteamVR. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So James O'Loughlin is saying, I unfortunately have never tried HDR in VR. Is PlayStation 5 and PSVR 2 the only way right now? So as far as I'm aware, there are only two consumer VR headsets that offer high dynamic range as of today. One is PlayStation VR 2 on PS5. Indeed, it's a standout feature. It's great. It's fantastic. In something like Gran Turismo 7, for example, when you're kind of in racing and the sun is low and you see a really bright sun and then really dark parts of the inside of your car, it's incredible. It really does add a level of kind of richness to the image that makes you feel more present. The other headset, which is I'm surprised James O'Loughlin doesn't realize, you already have, I think, Apple Vision Pro. Apple Vision Pro is also high dynamic range on the display and software side. So you get HDR on Apple Vision Pro and on PSVR 2 on PS5. That is Apple Vision Pro standalone to be clear. So, one thing I should maybe note on the HDR thing is that Ian and I, a few years ago, tried a meta prototype, and I'll see if I can find it here, called Starburst. And it was a research prototype of really, really, really bright HDR. I think here it is. It was the brightest headset ever to be publicly shown. I don't think there's ever been a brighter headset with a peak brightness of 20,000 nits, and of course used high dynamic range on both the hardware side and on the demo software side. And so we were really impressed by Starburst. It was striking to see how much brightness matters. People often talk about how much resolution matters, and that's completely true. But the dynamic range of the image actually is very, very important. And so, even when we talk about SDR, even if you don't have a HDR pipeline, the difference of having an OLED panel over LCD gives you kind of hardware level dynamic range that is greater. But once you do get to OLED, if you're still limited to SDR content, you're not really making full usage of the capability of OLED, because OLED can offer this like infinite contrast, and that's great, but you're not going to get that in a complex image in a meaningful way unless you have a high dynamic range software stack as well. So to give you context on how bright this thing is, this is 20,000 nits, and current pancake lens headsets like Quest 3 and Apple Vision Pro are roughly 100 nits. And then some of the aspheric lens PCVR headsets like Somnium, like the Pimax Crystal Super, they are like 200 nits, 250, that kind of range. And keep in mind that this is your perception of brightness is actually, as a human eye, logarithmic. So it's more than double. It's like a lot brighter. Vario XR4 is quite bright as well. I think it's either 150 or 200, somewhere in that range. And it matters. Like, it really does matter. You could argue that just as resolution is important, sure, just as field of view is important, a real big flaw of our current headsets that we all are wearing today is that the brightness just isn't there. And the reason, by the way, that these pancake lens headsets are so dull is that is the big trade-off of pancake lenses. Pancake lenses are amazing in so many ways, right? You can get these slimmer headsets that allow you to get a slimmer form factor, lighter design, use these kind of high-density, small displays when you have micro OLED headsets. They have excellent edge-to-edge clarity. They have an eye box that is almost unbelievable, to the point where you can set your IPD wrong and it's still clear. Like, what? How did they do that? Pancake lenses are incredible, but like everything in this industry, they have a massive trade-off, and it's that they nuke the brightness. So, like, the Vision Pro's display, as was reported even before it came out, is like 5,000 nits. The actual panel is 5,000 nits if you put it at full persistence. Once you take away the persistence, once you lower the persistence, to get so that you don't have a giant motion blurry image, you're still down to like 1,000 nits, right? Which is still wow. But then once you put the lens on there, 90% of that brightness dies in front of the lens. It really is that bad. So a lot of this is kind of just like an optical physics problem, and there are some very interesting exotic designs being worked on to try and get more efficiency, optical light efficiency out of pancake lenses. But for now, it's a huge issue. And yeah, it is kind of the loss that we get. Looking at some of the comments here, James O'Loughlin pointing out that heat dissipation is a huge problem for bright displays, and that's very much so true, right? Look at this. Look at those fans that are put onto this thing. These are like the kind of fans you'd put in your PC case. And this isn't a standalone headset. This Starburst prototype that we tried, this is just a PC VR headset. This is it on a table, but you put a cable into it when you're actually trying it. And that's cooling the damn displays. Even in the case of Quest Pro, for example, where it has the mini LED backlights to get relatively bright for a pancake lens headset, those fans are just as much cooling the displays as they are cooling the chip. But so yeah, the brightness really matters. It's one of the really cool things about PSVR 2 on PS5. It's slowly coming to PC VR, but don't expect it anytime soon. It's there on Apple Vision Pro. And a question I am seeing here is, do we expect it on Quest 4? Notably, high dynamic range as a technology arrived on the Nintendo Switch 2 through an LCD panel. And we'll talk about that now because I have a question here from Ramvis. Is there a display option that is a middle ground of LCD and OLED? So technically, if I take that question in a really pedantic technical way, no. But realistically, to answer it in a practical way, yes. LCD with a fancy backlight, which is what mini LED, as the companies call it, really is, right? These companies will tell you it's QLED, it's mini LED, it's LCD with a fancy backlight, right? Instead of having one backlight, you have lots of little backlights. And then usually a lot less than you have color pixels, right? In fact, always. So you have millions of color pixels and a few hundred or a few thousand in the best mini LED displays backlights. And then you can dim each of these backlights and kind of get a approximation of OLED. Because just to be crystal clear for anyone who doesn't know what we're really talking about here, LCD, you have color pixels and you have a backlight that does the light part. So on a really, run-of-the-mill, low-end, simple LCD display, it's one backlight. On some, you have 4 zones or something, but on your typical low-end LCD, it's one backlight. So the entire image can get darker or brighter, but not individual pixels. The magic of OLED is that each pixel controls color and light. There's no backlight on an OLED. Each pixel is its own backlight. And so you get per pixel control of brightness. And that's where HDR really shines. That's where contrast becomes infinite, because you can literally have half the display turned off, completely black, and then the other half at peak brightness. And you can do that on a pixel level. So if you're looking in Elite Dangerous at the stars, you can see pure blackness, and each little star can be lit as its own pixel. If you want to do that on an LCD, you get this murky gray in space, or if you're in a dark street or whatever in a VR game, a murky gray. And that's the biggest disadvantage of LCD, and it really hurts in VR because you have this facial interface on where the area that's not being rendered by the headset, your peripheral vision, the facial interface is actually pretty close to dark, right? It's very black. And then you kind of can see the gray murkiness. So in a mini LED headset, you do local dimming where you can increase the brightness of zones, these little mini LED backlights, little tiny little backlights. But each of these zones is still thousands of pixels, right? So if you do have, a star, for example, where it should just be one little point of light lit, you'll actually see this kind of halo effect where the area around the star is brighter as well. And it's kind of a murky gray. And then, it's not just the star itself. So it is a midpoint. It is what you see in, for example, Quest Pro. It's used in a lot of PC VR headsets, Somnium, Vario XR4, Pimax, Crystal, Super. And it kind of does offer this kind of middle ground. You'd much prefer it than a regular LCD. I want a lot saying that the black levels are terrible in Quest 3, really disappointed. Yep, Quest 3 is not a mini LED panel. It's just a regular old LCD panel, unfortunately. So yeah, the question is, do we expect to see Quest 4 have high dynamic range? And the answer is, it depends on if they do use an LCD panel with mini LED backlights. If they do, I do expect to see HDR, yeah. But it's probably my biggest open question about Quest 4 that I don't know the answer to. Will they stick with a regular LCD, or will they go for a mini LED backlit LCD? I don't expect OLED or micro OLED. The reason I don't expect micro OLED, to be clear, is that micro OLED is still far, far too expensive. The micro OLED panels are the reason that Vision Pro is $3,500. It's the reason that Play for Dream is $2,000. It's the reason that Big Screen Beyond, which doesn't have any computing hardware nor tracking or anything like that, is $1,000. Micro OLED is incredibly expensive. But yes, Quest Pro is the only Meta headset to date that used a mini LED backlight. Lots of comments here. Yeah, so the question is, right, we're saying Quest 4 won't use micro OLED. It might use mini LED. Why not OLED? Well, you see the reason why in PlayStation VR 2. Firstly, right now, the density of OLED panels mean that you need to use Fresnel or aspheric lenses, which is just not going to happen in Quest 4. The other problem is the mirror, right? You do get this incredible punchy colors and this incredible dynamic range of luminance on PlayStation VR 2's OLED panels, and I'm gonna, I know there are a lot of people who really, really enjoy that, and you're absolutely right, it's incredible, but for me, it's just hampered by this noisy mirror image. The other thing is that, like, to even get a good OLED panel like that, it's not even full RGB, as in you don't get red, green, and blue subpixels for every pixel. It's an equivalent of having like 2/3 of the subpixels. So you get this image that is either really, what's the word I'm looking for here? Either you have visible gaps between the pixel, a screen door effect, or you blur it out slightly in the lenses, like they do in PlayStation VR 2, and then you get this soft image. It's unfortunately a trade-off. If money was no object, if some company magically tomorrow figured out how to produce micro OLED panels at really low cost, everyone would be using micro OLED, right? It is, other than the fact that you probably couldn't drive like a really wide field of view, it is the ideal currently existing display type for headsets. Eventually, every headset will probably use micro OLED or some future version of normal OLED that is a lot higher density. That's the kind of caveat there. But unfortunately now, it's just not something that can happen. So I think we've got a lot of detail here into this topic. I see Monsters saying, I remember you being impressed by the local dimming update on Quest Pro. Don't get me wrong, like, again, it's a lot better to have local dimming via mini LED backlights than it is to have a regular LCD. But it's still not OLED, right? Like, it's, again, you have millions of color pixels. You have thousands of, think of them as light pixels, the mini LED backlights. So you get these, you don't get the same, like, precision of control over brightness, unfortunately. But yeah, so HDR coming to PSVR 2 on PC, but with only the color part, not the brightness part, only for certain developers. We'll have to see what happens. The only kind of, again, to crystal clear this, the only way you get HDR today properly is on PlayStation VR 2 on PS5 or on Apple Vision Pro. I really do wonder what we'll see around that on Android XR. I would expect the Samsung headset to support HDR and Android XR as well. It seems very likely, but we don't have direct confirmation on that. I agree with LL's comment to kind of finish up this part of to this news topic, that for Quest 4, it would be ideal to see something like a 2.5K display that does have mini LED backlight. Okay, what is our next topic? Our next topic today is the Nvidia RTX 5060 family. So we just kind of want to briefly cover this. Firstly, by saying, if you have the money, don't get these. If you do want to really experience the best of PC VR and experience it at the kind of resolutions and frame rates that PC VR can be driven at, you're going to want to get a higher end card than this. You're going to want to get, the 5080 or the 5090 if you're on a budget, the 5070. But we have heard from some of our viewers and our readers that they are on an extreme budget and they're trying to get into this industry. They're trying to get into this technology and experience what we're all experiencing on a lot less resources than what some of the people here who are able to afford the higher end cards have. So we just do want to note that the RTX 5060 family has come along now, and it starts at $300. See if I can bring this chart up, because it's not going to come up the conventional way. Stand by, folks. Should be on screen in a moment. Yeah. So from $300, you have the 5060, which should offer somewhat similar performance to the 2080 of 2018. Now, why am I comparing it to a 2018 card? Because that 2018 card was more than twice the price, and it was the card that Half-Life Alyx, the PC VR game, was designed to run very well on. So if you are on an extreme budget, you could get into PC VR with a $300 graphics card. Now, once again, don't do this if you can't afford more than that. At the very least, go for, a 5070. But what we've heard again and again is that when we come out here and start telling people about all of the, expensive things they can do, they get turned off by the idea of PC VR. There are people out there who get a Quest 2, a Quest 3, a Quest 3S, and they're curious about PC VR. They do want to get into it, but once they start hearing that it's $2,000 or $3,000 to really do it properly, they're not interested. And what world would you rather be in, where there are people who join in with a low-end card, low-end equipment, and play Half-Life Alyx, they play the PC version of VR Chat, they play some of the PC VR stuff like Skyrim VR and other stuff that developers are putting out there, Vertigo 2, or they don't at all. I'm sure there will be a lot of opinions here on the comments. Now, the other thing we should point out is that MSRP is kind of misleading, because in this era of graphics cards being used for AI and crypto, of course, it's very difficult to get a card at MSRP. So all of these assumptions that I'm kind of making right now are assuming that you can get that. But look, if you just want to play Half-Life Alyx, you want to build a gaming PC, you're not trying to run a 4K monitor at 240 FPS, you've just got your Quest 3S, you want to play Half-Life Alyx, and you're on a real extreme budget, and you're not going to do it otherwise, Nvidia does have some kind of cards here. And of course, the other good thing is that, these things are running at like 145 watts, 250 watts, that kind of range, which does matter to some people as well, especially in countries where electricity costs a lot more than in certain other countries. So I'm going to look at some of the comments here. Rambus saying they recently bought a 4080 laptop coming from a 2080 Super, and they're very pleasantly surprised that they can get 70 FPS in Microsoft Flight Simulator 24 in VR on medium/high. Wabu is saying the 5070 would be fine for Quest 3. Most HMDs are not that high resolution to justify a 5070 Ti, let alone a 5080. For a lot of games, yes. The one thing I want to push back on, though, is simulators. A lot of these simulators, like DCS, like the racing simulators, you can argue about whether they're poorly optimized or whether it really does take this much resources on a fundamental level, but they are not going to run well on anything but the highest end card. I don't think even people with a 5090 who play these really heavy simulators are always going to see some performance drops, some issues where they wish they could push the graphics further. PC VR in these heavy simulators is still a real challenge to run, right? It is. It just is. You've got a much wider field of view than what people typically have their monitors on. You're trying to run at a lot higher frame rate. You can't use techniques that cut down on you can't use techniques that trade off latency for throughput, because this is something people don't really realize. We talk about VR being more hard to render, more difficult to render because you have two eyes, right? So you got stereo, even though it's not 2 times as hard. There are techniques that can make it only like 1.3 or 1.4 times as hard. You've got, a wider field of view image, so there's more geometry being drawn. You're trying to do 72, 80, 90 instead of 60. But there's another thing. A lot of flat screen games, and this is on console and PC, use rendering techniques that trade off latency for throughput. What I mean by that is they add an extra couple of frames of latency in order to increase the frame rate. And so that's fine on a flat screen for some people, but you can't do that in VR. You just can't. It'll feel sluggish and awful and make you feel sick. So you can't do that. So VR is even harder to run than you would think immediately. And I just want to crystal clear, if you are someone who has the money, right, money's no object to you, you're thinking of playing like DCS, Flight Simulator 2024, Elite Dangerous, iRacing, Assetto Corsa, spend as much as you can if you have the money. You're never ever going to feel satisfied if you have a VR headset and you're trying to play a PC VR simulator, is unfortunately the reality. You're never going to be like, well, I'm really, really happy that I'm maxing out this game and getting 90 frames. It's not going to happen at a good resolution. Okay. That all said, again, if you're just trying to run something like Half-Life Alyx or the PC version of cross-platform VR titles like Behemoth, Alien, Metro, you can have a fine time with one of these cards, and you can do it for a lot cheaper than that. It's the simulators where stuff gets really difficult, as well as, of course, VR chat, where your mileage is going to vary massively. Some VR chat worlds, you can run it on that 5060, or you can run it on Potato. Other VR chat worlds are going to make your 5090 screen. Fortunately, that is just the nature of a user-generated content platform like that, where it just depends on what the world creator has done in terms of polygon and shader complexity. And of course, the avatars as well. The VR chat has really improved its tools to limit the complexity of avatars, and even for mobile, automatically kind of optimize them there. And yeah, just want to finish off with Onakazi's comment here, that indeed the MSRP is a mild suggestion whispered down at high noon this generation. So yes, that's even tougher for people on a budget, unfortunately. There is a parallel universe out there where deep learning didn't work, right? It's like scaling it, just like decades ago, people thought deep learning wouldn't work. Say in that parallel universe, deep learning didn't work and crypto never existed. We would all probably have cheaper and easier to access GPUs, because there wouldn't be kind of that other demand there. So that's not the universe we're in though. GPUs are not just for gaming. Okay, so our next topic is one I'm again going to have to kind of bring up in a slightly less conventional way today. So apologies, folks. The difficulties of trying to do something like this solo today. Stand by, actually. Yeah, the next topic is this REC thing. These fighting robots that you control from your headset. This is a pretty crazy idea, and as far as I'm aware, not something that we've seen anyone else propose yet. We're going to have an article about this one later. We currently do not have an article live on this, so I'm just going to very briefly cover it. This is the part where this should load on screen. Yep. So the idea is this is going to be a VR game, apparently, according to its creator, coming out later this year. We'll have more details in the article about who the creator is and why you should be somewhat skeptical of their claims, where you will control a virtual fighting robot in the game that is designed to have the same responsiveness and movement dynamics as a real humanoid robot. These are the kind of robots, if you haven't seen, that are coming from Chinese companies like Unitree for on the order of like $50,000 to $100,000. And then the idea here, according to the creator, is that the best people of the VR game will then be invited to a physical event where they will put on a headset and control a real robot that's fighting another real robot. And this will kind of be like a sports televised, I guess, streamed, it's 2025, right, thing that people watch. And I assume their monetization is they'll have sponsors, etc. And so this is a pretty crazy idea. If you haven't been following it, VR headsets have been used across the robotics industry to both train motion capture for humanoid robots and to remotely pilot them. So, for example, if you saw Tesla's Optimus robot at their AI event a couple of months ago that was in the crowd kind of talking to people and doing dynamic stuff, that was actually a human being in a Quest Pro, in the other lot, right, remotely controlling it, using their hands and, their headset movement being translated in there. I think they're using gloves for that as well. So we do expect to see this remotely piloted humanoid robot thing be an increasing use case over time. There's a lot of stuff you can do where before AI is capable of it, you could remotely control these robots. An idea that people have had is that you can get them to do useful work that way, right? So, and even what's the word here? Interesting is not the right word, but an idea I've seen floated is that people in developing countries would be paid a wage that is appropriate for that developing country to control a robot in the first world that is doing useful work, thus that you could kind of get cheaper labor. Now, I'm not going to get into the ethics of that or anything like that. I'm just describing what certain companies are exploring. And so all of this, the common factor is that it's being driven by VR, because VR gives you head tracking, it gives you hand tracking, all by default. And of course, with Quest 3 and Quest 3S, upper body tracking with other strapping hardware to your body, you can get body tracking, of course, on PC VR. Just an idea to kind of float. I'm seeing some people say this is a super cool idea straight out of sci-fi and anime. Dundan's pointing out that the name for this is telerobotics. That is true. And yeah, we're certainly going to keep an eye on this and see whether this is real. Again, we'll have more details in the article about why this may not become a thing. There are some big questions about the creator. But as James O'Loughlin says, this is BattleBots reborn. Yeah, people are, Andrew Tech, responding to the idea of humanoid robots for kind of developing world to first world labor costs, which would indeed, allow you to lower the cost of production. And it would, obviously, all this is going to be used to train AI, right? So you get human beings remotely controlling these robots to perform these tasks, while then, of course, recording everything and using that as training data to eventually have AI be able to do this. So we could be in this weird middle ground where we have humanoid robots before we have, well, let me repeat, where we have affordable mass-produced humanoid robots before we have AI that is capable of generally controlling them in all situations. And so you have human beings do it in the meantime. And that would be quite the world that I don't think many science fiction worlds envisioned, many science fiction authors envisioned, but I'm sure there are some, as I've seen some mentioned in the comments. Yeah, let's move on to the next topic here. So, James Cameron, the legendary filmmaker, has recently announced a partnership with Meta. We covered this before. That's not the news here. Back then, I'll just kind of run through that partnership actually, because I'm sure not everyone is familiar with it. So this partnership is with Cameron's new company, Lightstorm Vision. This partnership was announced in December. And this startup from James Cameron has the goal of making stereoscopic technology ubiquitous for all visual media by enabling stereoscopic 3D content creation in as seamless a manner as traditional 2D. So what does that mean? It means that he wants to make TV and movie productions able to shoot in 3D with almost no extra cost and effort. He wants to just make it something that is just part of the pipeline of shooting a movie, so that it's not something they're thinking about. It's not something they have to, hire a bunch of experts and get completely different camera stacks and everything. He wants to infuse this 3D technology into the default of Hollywood productions. And thus, every movie in Cameron's vision and dream would then be available in 3D as well as 2D. Meta said that this partnership will bring world-class 3D entertainment experiences spanning live sports and concerts, feature films, and TV series featuring big-name IP to Quest's Horizon OS. So to be clear here, folks, we're talking about rectangular 3D, not fully immersive for now. At least that's not what they're specifically talking about here. They're talking about, watching Avatar in 3D, watching Dune in 3D, a regular rectangular flat screen movie or TV show, except with stereoscopic depth, like when you record a spatial video on your iPhone 15 or iPhone 16. So basically, the new news here, that partnership was in December. The new news here is that Cameron was in a discussion, a public discussion with Meta CTO Andrew Bosworth, who was pictured with in that earlier image. And in this discussion, Cameron waxed lyrical about headsets and about how they are the ideal viewing device for 3D movies and how they solve the problems that have plagued 3D cinema and tanked 3D TV, which is, as you all know, a very, very dead technology. So last decade, in the 2010s, Cameron, on a few occasions, was kind of quoted as being kind of against VR headsets, kind of, not really getting it, criticizing certain aspects of them, which, fair play, right? These technologies were very primitive last decade. We've seen a huge, huge change in the past 10 years as consumer VR was rebirthed to what we have today, right? Your Quest 3 today is, in so many ways, superior to the Oculus DK2, for example, that was there 9 years prior, and in a different league to the DK1 that was there 10 years prior. But now, Cameron has completely reversed. And in this discussion, he essentially says that Quest 3 and Apple Vision Pro have completely changed his mind on this, and that he is a believer now. He is part of the religion that we're all part of, figuratively speaking, of course, no offense to any real religions, that these headsets are the future. And so he essentially kind of pointed out the issues with traditional 3D TV and 3D cinemas. And if you're not familiar with that, kind of there are two 3D glasses technologies. Well, there's three. You had those really old red green ones, but we're not going to talk about that because that's 1970s stuff. The modern 3D that you see in 3D cinemas and that you saw in 3D TVs before they died were either polarized glasses or active shutter glasses, and they both have horrible trade-offs. So the polarized glasses that you would wear in a cinema, the ones that are just regular glasses, they don't have any like battery or electronics in them. They have the effective resolution. They take the resolution and take it in half. And the active shutter glasses that you might have had in your 3D TV that you would have to charge, or they have a battery in them, had visible flickering, which could cause eye strain. And critically, both types of 3D glasses decimated the brightness of the image you see. We talked earlier in the show about how pancake lenses nuke the brightness of the image. Well, these 3D glasses did even worse, especially in cinemas where you have a projector, for example, right? Where your brightness already isn't great. And the whole point is that you make the whole room dark so that it doesn't matter too much. We talked about how Apple Vision Pro and Quest Pro are at like 100 nits. Your typical viewing experience in a 3D cinema was 50 nits at best in a cinema. And so this is one of the reasons that 3D sucks. Again, you got crosstalk, you've got eye strain. It's terrible. 3D TV died for a good reason. I'm sorry if you're in the comments and you liked it, but it died for a reason. It sucks. And I'm sure if any of you have tried watching 3D movies on a headset, be it a Quest, be it a Rift, be it a Apple Vision Pro, you'll find that it's a completely different experience. And it's one of the things that I really praised in my Apple Vision Pro review, for example. When you're in Vision Pro, you're watching a 4K HDR 3D movie. It's stunning. It actually makes you sad to go back to regular movies because it just feels like it's missing something. And to like comparing it to watching that same movie in 3D in a cinema, it's not even the same thing. As Cameron points out, with headsets, you get a discrete image for each eye, and that just solves so many of the problems. You're not trying to like do any fancy technique of either, active shutter glasses where you're seeing, like one eye at a time, or, the polarized glasses where you're kind of having half the image polarized for each eye. It's a real true 3D by default. It just works, and it's fantastic. So I'll go into what Cameron said. He said, the heartbreaking thing for me is that we have a perfectly calibrated theater we work in for our final authoring steps of grading brightness, color, and dynamic range, all that sort of thing. And it looked great. It was incredible. And we were just so self-congratulatory. And then we go out to the real world and see how 99% of people are seeing it, or 99% of the theaters, I should say. It's less than a quarter of the brightness. So when you lose that amount of brightness, you lose all the perception of dynamic range. It doesn't matter how good your blacks are. If your highlights are only 50 nits above that, it just looks dim and dull. And yeah, we're giving you spatial cinema, but we're taking it away on the other hand. And so after detailing his gripes with the traditional 3D cinema, he went on to describe his experience with modern headsets like Apple Vision Pro and Quest 3. Here's what he said. A door opened for me. It was like the heavens parted, light shone down, and there was an angel choir singing. It's like, this is how people can see the movie the way I created it to be seen. He then later says, I was just looking at some Apple Vision Pro material in a headset that we're going to share with some of the execs later this morning, thinking, wow, this looks great. So Cameron's on board. He's right. Any of you who have tried a 3D movie in a headset will know it. He's right. And it sounds like Meta wants to bring this to Quest. Ironically, of course, given this discussion, given this partnership between Meta and Cameron, today, right now, there is no official way to rent or buy a 3D movie on Vision Pro or stream, or on Quest 3 or stream. On Vision Pro, there is. At launch, there were over 150 3D movies on Vision Pro available between Apple TV and Disney Plus. Today, there are over 250. And it is really one of the shining points of Vision Pro. And we'll get in later in the discussion about how more people may be able to get access to that soon. But like, even without the micro OLED displays and 4K, it's still pretty good on Quest 3, right? The sense of depth is still there. You still get that great sense of depth. So I really wonder if we'll see a streaming service or a movie rental system arriving on Quest with 3D movies. Right now, right now in Quest through the browser, you can get Disney Plus, you can get Netflix, but there's no way, as far as I know, to. Well, no, I guess they could do like a 3D through the browser, but that's probably not how it's going to arrive. It'll probably arrive as an app. Right now, the only streaming app that's available on Quest as an actual app where you can download is Prime Video. Props to Amazon for that. They've led the way there. But on Vision Pro, you have the Disney Plus app, you have the Apple TV app. You download it, you go onto a plane, you watch your 3D movie. It's great. Let's have a look at some of the comments here. LL asking, are your eyes looking to the wrong camera, / the wrong camera is selected? When you look forward, your eyes are looking into the distance to the right. So I'm actually looking at the display monitor. I think Ian's mentioned this before, and I've mentioned it, but I see what you all see. So I keep looking at that. I probably should be looking into the camera. Apologies for that. Let's see if there are any comments here about 3D TV. James O'Loughlin joking that I'm telling anyone who enjoyed 3D TV that they suck for that. If you liked it, you liked it, but you'll like it even better on a headset, I guess, is the upside to that. CJ7 is pointing out that there are ways in which you can watch 3D movies on a Quest 3. Of course, there are. Whether those are technically legal is a different question. Of course, when I talk about official, I really mean legal, as in not violating copyright law. But of course, as we know, when there is no official way to do something, people are going to do it through whatever way they can anyway. Let's have a look at some of the comments here around 3D movies. Let's see. Yeah, just I guess a lot of people asking about Quest 3 and when we might see it. We don't know. There's no official announcement there. 3D movies actually coming to Quest. Cake Better saying that IMAX resolution and brightness can compensate for the flaws of polarized 3D movies. Yeah, a little bit, but like even so, it's still not good, right? Like I've tried it in a proper high-end IMAX with laser projection. It's still not as good as on a headset. It's still, the other issue is I went into the issues of like crosstalk and having resolution and flicker. The other issue is that like because of how these polarized glasses work, it's really only designed to be watched from head on. So unless you're the person in the very center row of the very center of the cinema, you're getting a non-ideal image. You're getting just like back in the day when LCD viewing angles were terrible and you looked at your laptop from the wrong angle and it looked like an alien world. You're going to get a reduced quality image as you are not on perfectly on aspect. So yeah, I mean, there are some cinemas that are good, but headsets are even better. That's the crazy part. Headsets are even better. People are pointing out that this used to be a thing in gaming as well. 3D gaming. You had PlayStation 3 had some support for 3D. Nvidia had those 3D glasses. They were back in the day, and all that died. I've said before that I really hope that that comes back for VR, right? There are lots of people that are now starting to play traditional flat screen games on an enormous virtual screen using their Apple Vision Pro, using their Quest 3, using tools like Steam Link, Virtual Desktop, Moonlight, and using cloud services like Xbox Cloud Gaming, like Nvidia GeForce Now. But what all of these are missing, I think, is 3D. Like we all love talking about how you can inject VR into games using UEVR and tools like that. But what about a middle ground, right? If you can do that, you can inject 3D. Okay, I think a lot of people would enjoy playing their same old games but in 3D, and that would actually make the whole playing your traditional flat screen games in a headset a lot more of a compelling option. I would love to see Xbox Cloud Gaming or Nvidia GeForce Now support this on headsets. It would be such a great feature. I understand why it's not a priority for them right now, but as headsets get cheaper and lighter and better in future and arrive to more people, I'd really hope that. There's a lot of speculation that Valve will focus on this. I'm seeing Big Bomb 654 in the comments bring up that Valve might actually focus on trying to bring a lot of Steam into 3D on Decker. There's a lot of speculation about that. That would be great, either through some sort of injection or just making it something that's really easily supported within Steam VR Theater View, and then kind of rallying developers there. And Paradise Decay pointing out that like you can do this. To be clear,
again, you can do this today, of course, reshade and super depth. There are tools to do this, but I'm saying, how do we get this for the typical user who doesn't want to play around with injection tools or even doesn't have a PC? How can, imagine how compelling that would be to be able to carry around a headset in your pocket that can create an enormous 3D gaming screen for your favorite games through Nvidia GeForce Now and Xbox Cloud and et cetera, et cetera. That would be really, really cool. Yeah, let's see. TMS is pointing out, bringing in some fighting words in here. People didn't like wearing 3D glasses. People dislike wearing VR headsets even more outside the VR bubble. I understand your point, but what I'm kind of arguing is that the advantage of putting on those 3D glasses wasn't good enough. Whether or not you put something on your face depends on how much value you get from it. Okay. So everyone who goes scuba diving puts something on their face, right? Because that's how you go scuba diving. Same thing with skiing. You put your ski goggle on, right? Same thing with welding. You're going to put your welding helmet on. The value you get in these cases is you don't get hurt by the elements or the welding, or, you don't get water in your eyes underwater, I guess. And you don't, I guess if it's a whole mask, right, you don't die. That's the value there. There are people who wear glasses. They put the glasses on because the value is that they can see the world better. Getting depth in movies, but introducing a bunch of trade-offs that actually make the movie experience worse in many ways, as Cameron is pointing out, made putting on 3D glasses not so fantastic, right? So the thing about headsets is it's net better. You don't lose anything compared to watching a movie in 2D on a headset and watching a movie in 3D. You don't lose anything. It's better in every way. You can toggle 2D and 3D on Apple Vision Pro, for example. And I don't know why you ever would turn it into 2D. It's incredible in 3D. It's genuinely, if you haven't tried it, try it as soon as you can. Go to an Apple store, and I think now as part of the demo, they let you use some of your own content from your iPhone. If you have a new iPhone, record a 3D video of something, or even ask the demo person if they can put on some 3D video. I'm sure they can find a way. It's incredible. So, of course, we can't ignore the fact that it does suck to wear a headset today because they are relatively thick and bulky and heavy, and that's very true. But what we continue to say on this show is that that is the biggest priority of the biggest companies that are working on this. Meta and Apple are both aware that their headsets are too heavy and bulky. They really are. They are under no illusions. And so we'll talk later on the show about what Apple's doing about that. And right now, I'll kind of briefly say that Meta is obviously working on that too. One of the headsets that we are most interested in seeing that Meta is reportedly working on, and is partially confirmed to The Verge they're working on, is this puffin concept, where they offload all of the compute and battery into a puck, not just the battery, but the compute too. And through that, according to the reports about this, they could get a headset that is on the order of 115 grams or so. We'll have to see whether that actually pans out, but that's an example of where the utility does get better. And Puffin would also be an open periphery design. So you're watching your 3D movie on a giant virtual screen. You've got excellent pass-through because this is 2027, and you have full quality pass-through, your real peripheral vision outside it. And so I think that kind of setup could be very compelling. It's also private, right? That's something that people don't realize. Compared to if you're on a plane, for example, watching that shitty little dim LCD on the back of the seat in front of you, where everyone can see those awkward sex scenes that pop up in the middle of the movie just as the person beside you starts to look. You have a fully private screen, only you can see it, and of course, it's not the only screen. You can also have your work alongside it, right? You can have your Mac virtual display here and your giant cinema screen in the background, or if you're on Quest, you can have your browser window or whatever and your thing up in the background. I also want to say, like, one of my interests is the history of technology as it is adopted and seen to be adopted in culture. And one thing I really love looking back on is the response to the idea of headphones. In the 1970s, people said that people would never wear headphones as like a mass consumer idea because people don't want to wear stuff on their head and they don't want to crush their ears. And I don't know, I'm sure if anyone who's left their home in the past 5 years will know, you can walk around and see people wearing AirPods and AirPods Max and headphones and earbuds of all kinds all over the place now, right? Gyms are full of people wearing them. Even walking down the street, you see people who have literally closed their entire ear off from the world and they're walking around. Try telling that to a skeptic in the 1970s and they'll tell you it's science fiction, right? Okay, let's see some of the comments here. I'm sure this is going to be quite the interesting discussion. Yeah, Arlen Kunder pointing out that the other advantage is portability, right? Compared to a traditional display. When you're in a headset, it can be wherever you want, in a hotel room, on a plane, on a train, in your backyard, in your bed, anywhere there's not a physical display. You can have whatever display, whatever size you want, wherever you want. And that is a massive, massive advantage. And there are some other comments here. TMS expressing more skepticism. You can't get people to even wear glasses who need them a lot of the time, and that's for their benefit. I mean, there are a lot of people who wear glasses all the time, right? Like we know a lot of people who wear glasses 24/7. It's all about the weight and value. Again, it's value, right? Nobody likes to. There are lots of things that people don't like doing, but you do it because you get value out of it. If you're gaming with your phone and it gets really, really hot in your hand, you put up with the fact that your hand's getting hot and sweaty because you want to play the game, right? People will do things if they give value. And again, it's possible to the weight and bulk of current headsets is not inherent to headsets. People have this problem where they think, I don't want to wear a headset. And what they kind of overload to that word headset is 500-gram box on your face. That is going to change quite soon. We're going to see headsets that are dramatically thinner and lighter, and that changes the equation completely. And again, it's about the utility you get there at the time. Coming into the comments here. James O'Loughlin pointing out that people used to make fun of the Bluetooth in-ear headphones for calls. Yeah, even the idea of having like something clipped onto your ear was thought of as super weird. And now you walk out on the street again and you see people with over-ear headphones all the time. Yep. Taking a more look at the comments here. Yeah, I think a lot of people are very excited for both 3D movies to come to Quest and 3D flat screen gaming. That kind of almost changes that term, right? We're using flat screen to mean a rectangular screen, but is it still flat if it's 3D? Is it, what's the term there for that? Some people have said 2.5D, but I guess there is a third dimension there, right? It's a tough one with terminology. Seeing a lot of people kind of point out that Big Screen Beyond and Big Screen Beyond 2 are already an example of headsets. They're a lot lighter. And yeah, that's completely true, right? I recently tried Beyond 2 and I could be in that thing for hours. There's no issue. But of course, the difficulty there is that thing is just a monitor. There is no tracking. There's no compute. How do we get tracking and compute in there while not going up in weight and bulk? That's the challenge, but it's not impossible. The other thing is that, of course, eventually we will have appealing AR glasses that are capable of doing this as well. And so you will not even have to have the weight of a lens and display. It'll just be a waveguide. And there are many things which we will critique AR glasses for on this show and point out that they're not going to be great for, having like immersive experiences where you have objects around you and things like that for a very long time. But once it gets even to a decent field of view, having a glasses form factor device that can conjure a 3D display is great. And we already see like display glasses around this, like X-Rail, for example. Right now, there's a kind of limited to 1080p. There are certain issues with birdbath optics, but that's already a good example of a device that is kind of ideal for watching 3D movies. People are pointing out that the kids who are growing up with Gorilla Tag right now won't care about wearing things in their face at all. Yeah, I don't think they will. In the same way that the kids who grew up with their Walkman don't care about wearing headphones anymore, even though their parents and people back then would have said people are never going to wear headphones. Again, this was something people said. People were looking at the market opportunity of like, will the idea of personal portable audio be a thing, right? Like Walkman, all of this. And the big criticism people had, again, technology history echoes through time. It really does. There's nothing that can be said about current headsets that hasn't been said about personal computers or headphones decades ago. All of this kind of stuff echoes through time. Let's see if we are ready for the next topic. I think we are. Let's move on to our next topic here. Great to see James Cameron on board. Great to see him a believer, but we do have more things to discuss. Are we coming to our final topic? We nearly are. So we have two more topics, Demeo and Apple Vision Pro 2. And again, as I said at the start of the show, I'm not here to talk about game design or game mechanics or anything like that. This isn't the gaming show, the VR gaming show. This is about VR hardware, technology, and industry trends. And I do just want to note this because this does show the kind of effect of technology on gameplay. So Demeo got this technical update on all platforms. It gives you a little bit higher quality visuals, a lot better loading time, which is great if you're a big Demeo player. But it's Vision Pro that's really got the biggest update here. So when Demeo launched on Vision Pro, it was not great. It was blurry, right? It was just downright blurry because they didn't use foveated rendering. It also didn't support mixed reality. So you either had full VR or 2D windowed. You had one extreme, either literally playing on a 2D window, like you're just playing through virtual desktop, except it's all standalone, or full VR, which is great sometimes. Sometimes I like to play Demeo full VR, but other times you want to play in mixed reality mode, especially if you want to play with other people in the same room. And now Vision Pro supports that. But the biggest change is the foveated rendering. And this shows you just how critical foveated rendering is for high resolution headsets, for standalone headsets in general, and console and PC. Because before foveated rendering, I just didn't want to play Demeo on Vision Pro. It was no better than playing on Quest 3, really, and even worse in some ways, especially because it just was so blurry. But now it has eye-tracked foveated rendering, and it looks so sharp and so nice. It's now my favorite way to play Demeo. It's great. It's excellent. It's fantastic. So I see a lot of Demeo lovers in the comments. I see a question here from James O'Loughlin. Civ 7 on Quest 3 or Demeo on Vision OS? Well, you should go and read the Civilization 7 VR review that we have on UploadVR.com from an excellent freelancer that was able to cover that. Even the technical issues aside, which have been solved for some people, not for others, the problem with Civ 7 is that, as the freelancer put in their headline, it's a claustrophobic take, right? So the great thing about these grand strategy games in general, I guess Civ 7 isn't grand strategy, it's a 4X, but strategy games in general is that you can kind of get this giant overview of a large area. With Civ 7 on standalone headsets, to make it work within this compute envelope with VR, again, we talked earlier about how VR is so much harder to render than regular flat screen. They've had to kind of only let you see a small circle, a cutout of the map at one time, and you can kind of obviously pan around it, although the controls are quite awkward because you have this thing in front of you and you're kind of pointing your controller down like this and straining your arm to move it. And of course you can zoom in and zoom out, but you always have this feeling of, I wish I could just see the whole damn map. And of course on Quest 3, that's not going to happen. You would need a lot more compute there. Maybe PC VR could have done it, but Quest 3 can't. There are other kind of minor issues again around the ergonomics. I kind of have said before that gaze and pinch, the interaction system of Apple Vision Pro, where you look with your eyes and pinch with your finger, is ideal for strategy games because I can keep my hands completely at rest, sit here, and control a strategy game without having to like awkwardly kind of constantly move like this in a really unnatural way while still having the board flat. So there's this game from Resolution Games, same developer, right, called Gears and Goo. And it's fantastic on Vision Pro. It's a Vision Pro exclusive that Apple paid for. And it is a tower defense game where you're using this gaze and pinch. And once you play it, it's so obvious that this is how every strategy game in VR is going to work once every headset has eye tracking. It's indisputable. You would never want to manually kind of move your hand around like this ever again. But of course, you can't do that on Quest 3 because it doesn't have eye tracking. So there's these two issues. The compute isn't good enough to show you the whole map at once. It doesn't have the input scheme to have effortless movement. And this all just kind of falls apart. There are good ways to bring strategy to VR and MR. There are people who've done it right, but unfortunately, Civ 7 is not that. And so I would rather play Demeo on Quest 3. Demeo has better controls. Its game design more suits only seeing a small area at once, right? The game design works around that. It's not a strategy game where you're controlling like an entire empire over a huge map. And I have a question here. Is there crossplay with Demeo from Quest 3 to Vision OS? Yes. Demeo is one of the most crossplay-y, that's not an adjective, crossplay friendly titles in gaming. So let me see if I can get this right. It is available on Quest, Pico, Apple Vision, PlayStation VR 2, and that's just the XR world, and Steam VR. That's just the XR world. On flat screen, it's available on Steam, iPad, Mac, PlayStation 5, and Epic Games Store. And all of this is crossplay. And if you're an Apple person, it's cross-buy. So Apple has a cross-buy system they call Universal Purchase. If you buy this for either Mac, iPad, or Apple Vision, you get it for all three. It's one purchase, and you can play on your iPad, on your Mac, on your Apple Vision headset, and everything I just mentioned. It's all cross-play across all of these platforms. It's super duper cross-play. Demeo is fantastic in that way, right? If you have a headset and you want to play a game with your friend who doesn't have a headset, and you're a fan of this kind of turn-based, kind of card-based strategy game, I'm not the games person. I don't know the genres here. This is something you're going to really enjoy. Demeo it's a standout example of a great XR title, not just because of the crossplay. The other thing is, if you do have people who have a headset and you know them in person, you can get together in a physical room and play co-located. You can place the game board on a real table and all play. And if you have like a Quest 3 and you've got, pass through there, you're playing in mixed reality, co-located in the same room. It's a fantastic experience. You really should try it out. And it does obviously come back to that thing of we really want to see lighter and thinner headsets in future. And it's obviously going to be a lot more appealing, especially when you're kind of pointing down a lot with having this weight in front of your face. You really do want to do this on future thinner and lighter headsets, but for now it's still great, and you can see where it's going, right? And you can imagine how fantastic this will be in 2027 if Meta releases that Puffin headset that has, an open periphery. That means no facial interface. It's only touching your forehead. You can see below you and to the side of you in real life. Plus, it's 100 to 150 grams, and the compute's offloaded. You can see where this is going, right? Like we're still so early. One thing that should become a part of the VR download drinking game is me saying that we're so early. But it's so true. Like the hardware and software of this industry is still in its early days. There is so much low-hanging fruit. If you are only used to analysis of technology in the context of smartphones and tablets, you'll think that everything's supposed to happen on the scale of years and months. But if you take a broader view of technology and see that the iPhone was not the beginning of a category, it was actually quite near the end of the category of pocket computers that can fit in your pocket. There were PDAs and there were very bad smartphones before it. There were very bad smartphones before it. There were PDAs before that. If you look at even the evolution of computing in general over the course of decades, from the early personal computers, the IBM PCs, the Apple II, and where we are today, that's the kind of scale you have to look on of VR and AR. This is a multi-decade journey, and we are still super duper duper early. And I really need to highlight that over and over again. Like the headsets of 10 years from now will make you cringe at the headsets of today. And people will be shocked to know that there were headsets that didn't have eye tracking, for example. That will be one of those things. And even in a few years, I think people who are new will be shocked that headsets didn't have color pass-through. If you tell people back in my day, I had an Oculus Rift and it didn't even have any cameras on it at all, they'll be like, "What? You couldn't even see the real world? What?" It'll be kind of shocking. Yeah. Taking a look at the comments here. Jack B saying that Demeo would be great for Tilt 5. It would. I think Ian has begged the developers of Demeo to bring it to Tilt 5 on multiple occasions, and he's just right. It would be kind of very ideal. I see some other comments here. That for the gaze and pinch system, Arlen is pointing out that the neural wristbands will be fantastic because not only can you also get haptics, but it means that it doesn't matter if the headset cameras can see your hands, even if they're in your pocket, even if they're under the table, you can still do that pinch. And yep, that is a great example. Chris Meadows is pointing out that Chester Meadows is pointing out that normal gaming took over 50 years to get where it is now. Yeah, the first games consoles were 50 years ago. Games consoles are on what now? The 9th generation, the 10th. I can't remember which exactly it is, but those generations were every 5 to 10 years, not every couple of years. We're still only 6 years into standalone headsets with positional tracking for your head and hands, right? That the Oculus Quest launched only 6 years ago, which on the scale of personal computing and the scale of information technology might as well have been yesterday. And people are kind of trying to decide in the comments, are we today where PCs were in the early 80s, in the early 90s, in the 70s? That's an area of active debate. And people can have their own views there, but I do think that's the kind of range we're talking about. We're still not even at like the Windows 95 point, right? We're not even at that moment yet. We're still in the early days. This technology is still early. We haven't even settled on the default interaction scheme, which I would strongly bet is going to be gaze and pinch, whether it be through optical hand tracking or wristbands that detect your pinching. That's probably going to be the default interaction. We're not even there. Most headsets don't even have eye tracking. I'm going to say it again. It'll seem crazy in a few years that headsets don't have eye tracking. Someone's suggesting we're in the Windows Me era. That's a very niche reference. Yeah. Lots of interesting debates in the comments here. And people are pointing out that if VR is early, AR glasses are not even born yet, and that's very true, right? Like there's no pair of AR glasses that is anything like what we mean when we say AR glasses today, right? You can get external glasses, but they are no computer on board. They're birdbath optics that sit out far from your face and look really not good in real life. They don't look anything like regular glasses. You can get Snap spectacles for $99 a month as a developer, and they look even worse, right? They're ridiculously bulky. They are half the weight of a Quest 3, right? They're actually 200 and something grams, 226, something like that. There are, of course, the Meta Orion prototype that is $10,000 a unit and unshippable. And of course, you have simple smart glasses like Ray-Ban Meta. But as we say over and over again on this show, we do not expect to see truly appealing AR glasses of the kind that people imagine until 2027 at the absolute earliest. And even then, they will be very expensive and fraught with trade-offs, including a limited field of view. But what will happen in that time, as we often like to say, is that traditional VR style headsets, mixed reality headsets, XR headsets, whatever you want to call them, will get slimmer, lighter, higher resolution, and much, much better pass-through. That's the other thing when it comes to pass-through. People have this idea that like this is the fundamental limit. No, this is generation 1 pass-through that we have in Apple Vision Pro and Quest 3 today. That is going to improve dramatically in future iterations to the point where it's going to be, once you have all of these things together, once you have open periphery, once you have lightweight, once you have thin, a lot of the time today that you take the headset off to go and do something, you're just going to keep it on. And that's something that people even do slightly today, right? With color pass-through we have today. There are a lot of cases where when you're with your Quest 2, you would have just taken it off, where with your Quest 3, you just keep it on. If you just have to do a simple task before you pop back into VR, swap your controller batteries, for example. And I'm very sorry to the people who are playing the VR download drinking game for bringing up this chart, but it wouldn't be VR download if we didn't bring up this chart at least once per episode. People talking about streaming. TMS saying can't solve the speed of light, unfortunately. True, but you can have servers in the same city, in which case the speed of light is not an issue. The speed of light between you and a server in your same city is negligible. It's only an issue when you start going across countries and continents. And Big Bomb 647 saying that they're still of the opinion that a significant portion of adults will be exposed to VR in the workplace. That's a very good point and brings to a wider point that most people still have not tried good VR at all. By good VR, I mean not like a Google Cardboard 10 years ago or Gear VR or Oculus Go. I mean like a proper headset with 6DoF head tracking and hands or controllers. Most people in the world, even in the developed world, still haven't actually tried that yet, believe it or not. So we're still at that point. And people used to say in this industry, this is like a conversion on contact religion, metaphorically again, that once people try it, they get it. And that's the case a lot of times, right? There are a lot of people who buy a headset after trying it for the first time who would have had zero interest in trying it or in buying it until they try it. And I have demoed to hundreds of people in my time, hundreds. And it's one of my favorite things to do because the reactions, people just have no idea that this even exists. If you're in this audience and you've tried this, you're kind of ahead of the curve in knowing that even we're at this level. Most people have no idea, and they try it and they try a good demo, and they're like, the reaction is, I had no idea this was even possible. I had no idea we were here. I didn't realize it would be this good. And there literally have been dozens of people who I've demoed to who have gone out and bought a headset a couple of weeks later or a couple of days later. And that's recently. Years ago, they were waiting for something. Most people were waiting for wireless and standalone. So a lot of the demos I did before Oculus Quest, people would say, oh, I don't have a PS4, I don't have a gaming PC, but let me know when I can get one that doesn't need that. And I did. And a lot of those same people went out and bought the headset the next day. So yeah, a lot of people still haven't even tried any of this. And you're going to see this happen in Apple stores as well. This brings us nicely onto our next topic here, actually. But you could argue that the demos of Apple Vision Pro in Apple stores are more important to this industry than the Apple Vision Pro as an actual product you can buy. And that sounds a little counterintuitive at first, but there are going to be a lot more people who try the Vision Pro demo in the Apple store at their local mall or their local shopping center or whatever, and then realize this is incredible, but say, I don't have $3,500 or I'm not going to spend $3,500, who either go out and buy a Quest 3 or they say, I'll wait 5 years' time when it's cheaper and lighter. Speaking of cheaper and lighter Apple Vision headsets, that is, if I am correct, our final topic today that we will be discussing. So, Apple Vision Pro 2. Apple Vision Pro. It's great in some ways, but there are two huge flaws. There are lots of little flaws, but there are two huge flaws. One is the weight, and the other is the price. So, as you may imagine, those are Apple's biggest priorities for the successor. According to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman in a report over the weekend, Apple is readying a Vision Pro successor that is both cheaper and lighter. Unfortunately, Gurman, who, for context, revealed many of the details of Vision Pro 1 before it was even acknowledged to exist by Apple, he doesn't give any details, how much cheaper, how much lighter, when is it coming, but he does say that this is something that Apple is readying. Interestingly, he also says that Apple is readying a different Vision headset, which will be Mac tethered. And we don't mean that in the same context as like your PC VR headset, like your Valve Index being Mac tethered. We mean it as in for Mac Virtual Display. So it seems like a single purpose device that is designed to allow wired, low latency Mac Virtual Display. And according to Gurman, the kind of impetus for this is around enterprise, actually. So there's some enterprise companies that want to use this for certain reasons. And also, if that's all you're using your Vision Pro for, if it's literally just for Mac Virtual Display, you don't need all of the other stuff. So it'll be very interesting to see how that arrives. There were earlier reports that Apple was like exploring doing this with X-Real style glasses, but guess what? UploadVR was right again. Opaque headsets with camera pass-through are the better way to do it. The Demeo obviously won out in Apple. We've been saying it for a long time. The field of view limitations and other limitations of transparent optics mean that pass-through is going to win for the foreseeable future. It's really counterintuitive. It's hard for some people to swallow. They really don't want to kind of accept it, but it is the reality. Camera pass-through wins for now, for a long time in the future as well. Will that change eventually? Maybe, but foreseeable, camera pass-through. So it's going to be a vision-style headset, lenses and displays and cameras, but for Mac tethered. But that's a separate headset. Let's get back to Vision Pro 2, which is going to be the same kind of thing, a standalone headset with a tethered battery. What might be different? So the first report we ever saw about a Vision Pro 2 that was reliable in any way was from supply chain analyst Ming-Chi Kuo back in September or November, one of those two. And he said that it will use the M5 chipset. So Apple has not officially revealed the M5 chipset, but it should be dramatically more powerful, right? Because the M4, which does exist today, is dramatically more powerful than the M2. The M5, this will be an enormous compute upgrade and make the Apple Vision Pro 2 the most powerful standalone headset by far. Because today, and a lot of people don't realize this, while Apple Vision Pro's CPU smokes the Quest 3, its GPU is actually very similar. The GPU, but in terms of performance between the Vision Pro and the Quest 3, it's not leagues. They're pretty much roughly equivalent. And the word roughly is doing a lot of work there, but it is, from a developer perspective, not like the difference between console and mobile or between PC and mobile or anything like that. With M5, that could change. This would be leagues better. You could be talking like 4 or 5 times the GPU performance, which would be remarkable. The other key issue, or other key change, of course, again, is cheaper and lighter. And so this brings us to a apparent leak that has emerged in the past few days from an Apple leaker, where we may also know the color. Not super important, but it's interesting to note. So an Apple leaker has been sharing images of what they strongly suggest is the battery cable for a Vision Pro 2, and they've heavily hinted that they have a Vision Pro 2. How they have that, who knows? And so if you're not really sure what you're looking at here, let's start with the connector, because you may think, like, what the hell, is that a lightning cable? It's not. So Apple Vision Pro's external battery actually has a built-in proprietary connector on the battery side that is kind of like a wider lightning. It's completely proprietary. It's only used in the Vision Pro battery. And most Vision Pro owners don't even know this exists because it's locked in there. You can use a little like paper clip or SIM card tray thing to take it out. The only really reason you would ever really need to do that, I guess, is for repairs or if something was wrong with the cable. But you wouldn't, right? Most Vision Pro owners won't know this exists and it stays in there. So that's what you're looking at when you see this new cable. So keep your eye on this, keep that in your mind. And now take a look at, apologies for the delay here, this one, which is slightly less wide. And obviously the cable and kind of external housing here are a different color. So this brings us back to the image of the other shots here, where you can also see that the headset side connector for the battery cable is this same color. And if you're wondering, like, if you're not familiar with Vision Pro, you're wondering what is this little circular thing? It's this. It's the headset side connector that on today's Vision Pro is kind of like silver. And so this leaker, who strongly suggests they have the headset, has described the color as graphite dark blue, and they say that the headset itself will be this color. And so this will likely, it's likely a branding thing, right? Apple wants to make sure that you can look at Vision Pro 2 and say that it's not Vision Pro 1. Apple cares about this. We know from many reports over the years that Apple intentionally changes the look of things just to make it very clear that it's a new product, not always just for functional reasons. Yeah, and so Biggs is pointing out that there is one practical aspect of this, which shows that this being thinner suggests that it might use less power, right? It might actually draw less power, and that could be related to maybe they're running this M5 at like a lower TDP so that they can have a less heavy thermal system. Maybe they've integrated the R1's functions into like an M5V or something, right? Maybe this is a variant of the M5 that has the R1 stuff in it. Maybe they're just using some other less power hungry stuff. Maybe they've gotten rid of the eyesight front display. That's a super controversial one. All of this is speculation, to be clear, at this point. All the reliable reports suggest so far on this leak is cheaper and lighter, M5 chip, a lot more powerful, and it is now black, or should I say graphite dark blue. This leaker has also claimed that it uses titanium in a few of the internal structures, and they claim that's part of why it's lighter. Who knows about that? But titanium is obviously a lot stronger, so you can use a lot less of it for the same strength. Let's see here. This leaker has used the phrase Apple Vision Air, and you may have seen Apple Vision Air reported in a bunch of tech news outlets. And so, people are saying it's not Apple Vision Pro 2, it's Apple Vision Air. But this just comes from this leaker's speculation. I asked them, like, what is this thing labeled Air? Is it called Apple Vision Air? Like, where did you get this from? And they said, I don't know. I just think it's lighter, so it might be an Air, right? Like, this isn't an actual. That's not a leak. That's the leaker's speculation. So this is not to toot our own horn here, but this is UploadVR kind of digging in a bit and saying what is actually being said here and what's real and what's just somebody's speculation. Because when you see these reports from, be it Gurman, be it a leaker, be it information, within these reports, there are speculation and extrapolation mixed in with what they really know for sure. And one of the things that we are so careful to do is pick out, so what have they actually said that they actually either saw in person or heard reliably from someone who would know, and what have they assumed and implied and speculated when it comes to what the information they're providing is. And so I would not expect this to be called Apple Vision Air. Maybe it is. At the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. Some people are so obsessed with the names of things. At the end of the day, the headset's going to be the same, whatever it's called, whether they call it Apple Vision Pro, whether they call it Apple Vision Pro M5, whether they call it Apple Vision Air, whether they call it, something completely different, whether they call it Apple Vision Pro Max XL. It doesn't matter. The headset's going to be the same. It's just the words that somebody has come up to describe it, right? What's that Richard Feynman quote about the difference between intelligence and knowing the names of things, where, some kid came up to him in childhood and said, I'm so smart, I know the name of that bird. You don't know the name of that bird. And he pointed out, well, in a different language, it's called something completely different. So, what have you actually learned? Like, what does the bird do? What is its behaviors? How long does it live? Like, that's real knowledge. The name doesn't matter. It was a very strange tangent, but the point I'm trying to say is, what matters is what the actual product is, not what it's called. Let's have a look at the comments here. Okay, so let's have a look at the comments here. Starting from the start. Okay, so Biggs is saying M5 has nanite and lumen full support on UE5. Big news for Unreal devs. Yeah, there are a lot of like architectural improvements as well as raw performance here that make it much closer to PC architecture. Apple has this like interesting architecture here where it's not exactly the same as PC, but it's not mobile either. So some of the things that you lose out on in the Adreno chips of the Snapdragon chipsets from Qualcomm, you actually do get as a developer that you would normally expect on PC. So that's going to be super interesting here. Something that, for example, we haven't really seen come to standalone VR yet, but could come at some point is ray tracing. But there are other more mundane, run-of-the-mill techniques that would really help with developers. James O'Loughlin saying, doesn't the R1 offload a lot of the tasks the Quest 3 has to do? Kind of, yes. The R1 is interesting as a chip. So if you're not like familiar with what we're even on about here, the Apple Vision Pro has these two chips, the M2, the normal chipset, and then the R1. Some people, I think the R1 is more than it is, right? Some people think it's the second coming and it's, doing all these crazy tasks and it's so much better. In reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. A lot of the tasks that are offloaded on the R1 are already done by specific fixed function hardware on the Quest 3's XR2 Gen 2. So like the Quest 3 doesn't run its tracking stuff on the CPU and GPU. It has a DSP and it has an NPU, then it runs all this stuff on. So it's already offloaded from a part of the chip component. But an issue is that that means it's not offloaded thermally. So when you use pass-through of any kind, just enabling pass-through in your app on Quest 3, you limit the GPU and CPU level that you can access. But that's not because pass-through is using the GPU and CPU. It's because thermally the thing overheat because you're doing it all on the same chip. So one of the biggest advantages on Vision Pro of having the separation is that these are thermally separated, and there are two fans here, right? If you kind of zoomed out one more level from this breakout here, you'd have a big fan here and a big fan there that cool these things down as well as the displays. That's not the only advantage of R1. The other, and the reason they developed it in the first place, is bandwidth. So one of the biggest things that limits pass-through quality today is not that they can't put better cameras in there, right? Quest 3 is 4 megapixels for its color cameras. Each Vision Pro is 6.5 megapixels. But like, it's not like Apple and Meta went, well, those are the highest megapixel cameras we can find. Better just stick those in there. That's not what happened. The reality is that if you want to process and stream these things to the displays at 90 frames per second or 30 or 60, whatever it happens to be, in real time, that's a hell of a lot of bandwidth, right? Because it's not just the color cameras, you're also doing all of these tracking cameras at the same time. And the Vision Pro, it's not just the outside facing tracking cameras, it's the eye tracking cameras. So the sheer amount of camera bandwidth that you're trying to do on these headsets is enormous. And that was actually why Apple developed the R1 in the first place, because the M2 doesn't even have the capability to take in that much bandwidth. So they had to do a lot of this processing on the R1 and then kind of stream it to display. It has a bunch of other advantages too, a huge number of advantages, including that, like, if certain things stall on one chip, pass-through can still stay stable, though a lot of that is Vision OS software architecture. What I'm trying to say here is R1 is great in some ways, but it's not the second coming, and it is not inconceivable to think that Apple could unify these all into one chip, even though it would have it would lose the thermal advantage of separating this out. That's true. But if you have the M5, which is like a bunch more efficient, they could, instead of saying, let's run the M5 at max performance, they could say, let's actually not run the M5 at max performance. Let's limit the performance artificially, but then leverage that to then have less heat generated from the CPU and GPU, which means lighter cooling architecture, less battery draw, which means you can either make the battery lighter or eventually one day put the battery in the headset. Controversial, but I don't think when Apple does release an Apple Vision Air or an Apple Vision that it's going to still have an external battery, but that's very, very, very controversial. The point I'm trying to make is you could do it in one chip if they really wanted, but maybe they don't. Maybe that thermal advantage and the other advantages are so great that you get an R2 and then you can also upgrade the pass-through and things like that. Who knows on that one? I don't have a strong opinion either way. TMS asks, do you think they will ever entertain using the phone as a processing device? I bet every Vision Pro user has an iPhone. This is a really big discussion in the industry, and I've actually published an article on UploadVR.com a few months ago, maybe it was last year, that was headlined, funnily enough, why your iPhone won't power your Vision headset. So you can guess my answer based on that. The fundamental problem with powering your Vision headset with an iPhone is that your iPhone doesn't have a cooling fan. So all of these standalone headsets, I'm so sorry to the people who are playing the VR download drinking game, all of these standalone headsets have one unique feature that phones don't have, even though they use the same kind of chip, right? You could theoretically stick a M2 in a very, very chunky iPhone, and you could literally use the Quest 3's chip in a smartphone, right? It's very, very similar kind of chip. But there's one massive, massive difference, and that is the cooling fan. The active cooling fan. That means that the chip can be cooled in real time. Apologies, I'm waiting for some things to load in the background here. So when your phone starts to do a really heavily computational task, such as running a 3D environment or doing phone AR, it will heat up continuously, as any computing device does. And what happens is eventually you'll get to a heat that is too high where it starts to risk damaging the chip or overheating the phone or the battery. And so what happens is called thermal throttling. The system intentionally reduces the maximum CPU and GPU frequency to avoid overheating. And over time, that comes down and down and down, and you get less and less performance coming out of the headset. Standalone headsets, on the other hand, have active cooling fans, physical fans that push out the hot air into the open space in front of you. Trying to find a good image here, but unfortunately, this is not loading very well at the moment. But even on this image that you can see on screen right now, you can see these enormous vents on top of the Vision Pro today that push out this air. And if those didn't exist, the headset would really simply not work in the way it does. So your iPhone, in contrast, is trying to do all this compute in like 7 millimeters with no fan, and thus it would just thermally throttle. Quest headsets have this too, for example. I've gone over this before, but that seam that you see on the front plate of your Quest 3 and 3S, that is not an aesthetic choice, nor is it a result of cheap manufacturing. That's where the hot air is pushed out. So if you go and look at your Quest 3, if you have it in the room right now, notice on the front plate that gap. Here's a better image of Vision Pro where you can kind of see this vent at top and see just how big it is. It's really, really significant. I'll see if I can find one for, yeah, here's Quest 3 and Vision Pro in an actual image here. This seam on the Quest 3 is where the hot air gets pushed out. It's a very clever design, actually, because it almost doesn't look like it has one. Vision Pro is a higher TDP device. It's drawing more power, more heat, so it needs to have these enormous, very visible fans. Quest 3S is the same thing. This seam on the front. Your phone doesn't have that. For one reason your phone doesn't have that is that it would be impractical from like a thickness perspective. You'd have to have this fan in. You would also start to hear your phone like fan go up. But I think the bigger reason it doesn't have it is because you would lose water resistance. These phones today are designed to be sleek and beautiful and highly water and dust resistant, and you can't really do that while you have a cooling fan that's blasting out hot air. The other problem is it would get blasted into your hand, right? Like you're holding your phone in your hand. I guess you could do it at the top and bottom, but then if you're holding your phone sideways, you would be blasting out into your hands. The great advantage that is a gift to this industry is that when you're wearing a headset on your head, the space in front of you is open, right? You're not like trying to think of an example of where that wouldn't be true. I guess if you kind of like stuck your head in a pillow or something, but that, like, why would you do that? The space in front of you is open, and so you can push out all this hot air. Meanwhile, your iPhone in your pocket would just thermal throttle in a matter of minutes. And developers who have tried to build mobile AR applications know this well. They do. You can go and talk to them. It sucks because the phone just overheats in like 5 minutes. Anyone who had a Gear VR or Daydream will know this too, right? How quickly did you experience when you went into a graphically intensive app? The device is overheated. Please remove the phone. Sometimes on Gear VR apps, it would happen in 5 minutes. And we're talking about these headsets watching a 3D movie for 3 hours. We're talking about being in VR chat for 5 hours. It's not going to happen on passive cooling. Simply not going to happen. So that's why for the foreseeable future, your iPhone won't do that. It's also why Meta's Orion prototype has a lot less computing power than Quest 3. People had this idea that Orion is offloading the compute to a puck that you can put in your pocket, therefore it's going to be more powerful. No, less powerful, because it has to stay within those thermal limits. It can't burn your pocket, it can't thermal throttle, so it has to actually be at a lower TDP. And so that is why this little seam on the front of your Quest 3 is its most important feature, and you may not even have noticed that it existed. So, and it's also why your iPhone's not going to power this. Interestingly, Apple did explore having your iPhone power the Mac tethered headset that they were previously exploring with transparent optics, according to Mark Gurman, the same reporter from Bloomberg, but they found it just didn't work well. Again, I've been saying this on this show for years. I could have told them that it's not going to work. Anyone who's been in this industry for as long as I have can tell you, I have tried a dozen different renditions of powering the headset from your phone. In theory, it's such a great idea, right? Everyone's got a computing device in their pocket. You can remove so much cost. You can leverage the fact that they upgrade this thing every few years anyway. It's great. Let's build phone AR headsets and phone VR headsets. It was tried in the 2010s. It sucks. It doesn't work. They overheat, they thermal throttle. And here's the even bigger part, arguably. Nobody wants to drain their phone battery, because if you're running this thing at the kind of compute you need to do VR and AR, you're going to drain the phone battery in like an hour, right? It's going to just, your phone's like, nobody wants to drain their phone battery is another bigger issue. Okay, let's continue through the comments here. Apologies for the ranting today. Some people are saying, being just cheaper and lighter and more powerful isn't enough for the next Vision Pro. It depends on the time scale you look at. It needs to eventually get a hell of a lot cheaper and a hell of a lot lighter. But each iteration only needs to progress. As long as it's going in the right direction, where each iteration is cheaper and lighter, that's what we need, okay? As long as the iteration after this one, Vision Pro 3, is cheaper and lighter again, cheaper and lighter again, cheaper and lighter again, then over time, over the scale of decades, you get to where you want. And for each person, the amount of weight that they're comfortable having on their face, the amount of price that they're willing to pay varies. But each time you go down in the price range and weight range, you unlock a bunch of people for who that was their acceptable range. People are asking, when do we expect this to be announced, this Vision Pro 2? I have no idea. Not a clue. Some people are speculating WWDC. That is obviously when the original Apple Vision Pro was unveiled 2 years ago, although it only shipped a year and a half ago. Not even a year and a half, a year and 3 months ago. A year and 2 months ago. A year and 2 months ago. There was a big delay between it being announced and being shipped. And as people who watch our show and read VR Download or read UploadVR or active in the industry will know, Vision Pro was supposed to ship a very long time before that. Vision Pro was supposed to ship years ago. It was supposed to ship back in like 2022 originally. So this piece of hardware is actually quite outdated. That's why, for example, it's only Wi-Fi 6, not even Wi-Fi 6E, never mind Wi-Fi 7. And you have other little quirks. Like, if you look at the details of this thing, it's actually quite obvious that it's not from its time. It's from years before, but they had a bunch of engineering issues on the hardware and the software that they needed to get. And it's a miracle that this thing ever got out the door at all, to be honest. James O'Loughlin pointing out another thing about the iPhone is the software aspect, right? You would have to load the entirety of Vision OS onto iPhone or merge iOS and Vision OS. It would be really, really, really complicated from a software perspective. Let's go through more comments here. More people agreeing about the battery anxiety thing for the phone thing. Hussein saying they used to use an ice pack with their Samsung Gear VR on their Galaxy S6. Yeah, you can come up with some crazy cooling ideas. When Ian tried the immersed visor after Meta Connect 2024, they used an iced coffee to cool the thing. So yeah, I guess you can kind of you can use a lot of creative ideas there. Some people used to stick their Gear VR with phone in the freezer for a few minutes back in demos. You have no idea how frustrating it was to try and do demos back then when, like, how do you demo to 50 people in a row when, for even the first person, the damn thing can thermal throttle? Even the Oculus Go had this as a problem, right? So Oculus Go did not have a cooling fan. It's the only standalone headset I'm aware of that doesn't have a cooling fan. If you know of another one, let me know. It actually just had a giant heatsink. The front of it was a big heatsink on the inside. Obviously, there's a plastic cover over it, but it was a giant heatsink. And even Oculus Go could thermal throttle in certain situations, but like, it obviously had a massive thermal dissipation surface that's more similar to a laptop than a phone, and that, again, you're not holding with your hand. It's open air. Even that heat, as it's dissipating out through the front without the cooling fan, it's through open air. You're not holding in your hand. If you did touch the front of an Oculus Go after an hour journey, I actually had the thing, like, it almost burns your finger. It was that bad. And one of the biggest innovations of Oculus Quest, yes, it was the positional tracking. Yes, it was the controllers. But arguably just as important from Oculus Go to Oculus Quest was that Quest introduced the cooling fan. Okay. On to more of the comments here. Yeah, people are pointing out that the Orion prototypes puck had like 10% of the performance of Quest 3. And that is accurate here. Let's have a look here at more comments. Big saying people underestimate the performance requirements of full XR. Absolutely, especially with pass-through, right? The performance requirements, it's like your phone is usually barely doing anything, right? Like if you talk about like performance utilization of the CPU and GPU, the vast majority you're using your phone. It's these tiny little tasks, and that's why this whole concept of having efficiency cores and performance cores became a thing on mobile, right? Because most of the tasks you're doing, if you're just like swiping down an app or checking your notifications, this can be done on these things called efficiency cores, which are CPU cores, which are designed to be very low performance but very high efficiency. And then you have the performance cores for big tasks, right? For when you're gaming, for, I don't know, when you're doing a complex video editing task, whatever you're doing, right? Like in VR and AR, one of the things that happened with the XR chips, the XR2 Gen 1 in Quest 2 was pretty much just the Snapdragon chip of that year, the 865, I think, but changed a little bit. Whereas the XR2 Gen 2 was a big departure in many ways, where it actually is the same GPU, but on CPU, very, very different to the equivalent mobile chip. And one of the things is you care more about those performance cores and less about the efficiency cores, because there are some little tasks you can do on the efficiency cores, but like you're rendering a virtual world or processing pass-through cameras and doing all of this stuff to render in a mixed reality environment, you need performance cores, and it's a completely different thing than on your phone. Okay, more of the comments. Defhammer saying, so if I'm hearing this right, because the computer's on the head, we can take advantage of higher TDP active cooling, whereas a puck would be more limited in TDP because in a pocket. Absolutely right. Puck or phone, if it's in your pocket, you're screwed. Okay. Let's see some other comments here. James O'Loughlin pointing out some exotic cooling technology, vapor chambers, liquid cooling pumps on our faces. Yeah, I expect to see some of this stuff come into standalone headsets for sure. Cooling is one of the areas that we're seeing some startups in kind of deep tech really innovating on. And yeah, it would be more impactful to come up with like a cooling system than it would to be like a 5 times as fast GPU, because then you could make like these headsets really, really, really slim and light, and you can get AR glasses that are really, really powerful. But unfortunately, as the engineers say, physics is a bitch, and it does not want to comply. Jack B pointing out the advantages of Wi-Fi 7, right? Like Vision Pro is still on Wi-Fi 6. It's, again, because this thing was supposed to come out years and years and years ago, heavily delayed. That Wi-Fi performance jump will be huge if you have a Wi-Fi 6E or 7 router. It means you can use the 6 gigahertz band. Really significant if you do want to do ALVR, PC streaming and stuff like that. So that'll be cool. I guess also with Mac Virtual Display, like right now, I always talk about how Mac Virtual Display is excellent because it creates a direct point-to-point connection. But today, because this thing is still Wi-Fi 6, that's still a 5 gigahertz connection. So if you're in a congested Wi-Fi environment, if you're in a Wi-Fi environment where there's a bunch of different Wi-Fi 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz networks, you could still find some choppiness in Mac Virtual Display. But with that Vision Pro 2, they're going to be able to do 6 gigahertz, which, if you're not familiar with like what matters between these bands, the higher you go in gigahertz, the higher bandwidth you can do. But the trade-off is that the signal degrades more over distance and doesn't go well through walls. So 6 gigahertz, these higher gigahertz bands are perfect for VR streaming, whether it be flat screen streaming or full VR streaming from the two devices that are in the same room. They're like, they can see each other. They don't have to see each other. That's not strictly necessary. When you get to like 60 gigahertz, 60, that does matter. You actually do need point to point because it's literally not going to go through a solid object anymore. But it's 6 gigahertz. As long as you're in the same room, it's a fantastic experience, and it's really, really, really ideal for VR. So that's going to really help Vision Pro on streaming. Also downloads, right? Like this thing is not particularly fast on my network. I think it gets like a third of what Quest 3 gets. And funny enough, right? 7 times the price, a third the Wi-Fi speed. But again, very old headset in actuality, despite when it came out. Okay. Thomas Ireland saying that puck designs will be the norm for future headsets. That is one of the biggest debates in the industry. It's tough, right? The 3 ways you can approach this. Where do you put the damn battery? Let's not even talk about the compute yet. Where do you put the damn battery? Option A, in the visor, like Quest 3. Option B, in the back of the strap, like Quest Pro and Pico 4. Option C, in an external puck. None of these 3 solutions is the best. None of them are the best. They all have, let's use this word again, trade-offs. Putting the battery in the visor means that you don't have anything on the back of your head. You can lie back. You don't have anything to hold externally, but obviously the trade-off there is that you have a heavier visor, and that's not what we want. We want these slimmer and lighter headsets. Putting it in the rear means you don't have anything external, and you keep the weight off the front visor, and in fact, you even counterbalance it, because not only are you, it's kind of like a force multiplier, not only are you taking the weight off, you're actually then counterbalancing it in the back. But then what happens if you want to lean back on the sofa or bed, or even in the airline chair? Thud. Ugh, I can't put this in a right position because there's this giant, big, thick thing in the back of my head. It's not ideal. It's perfect for room scale VR, right? If you're doing room scale VR gaming, if you're in an industrial use case, professional use case, even if you're like doing productivity where you're sitting in a chair and you don't need to lean back, you're engaged and you're using a keyboard and mouse, perfect. But it's not good for watching movies, for the James Cameron use case. You want to, with my Vision Pro, with my Quest 3, if I'm using the default cloth strap, I can literally lie back in bed and pretty effortlessly have an enormous virtual screen. Or if you have a comfy chair, you can lie in that comfy chair, and you can craft the perfect ergonomic environment to watch a movie. You are not limited by physical screens anymore. You can have the comfiest, coziest movie watching experience that anyone could ever have. You can't do that if you have something in the back. Option C, having the battery tethered external. You keep the weight off the visor. You can lean back, but now you have a really horrible trade-off in itself, which people who are proponents of the external battery don't really acknowledge, which is that you have an external battery. And you never forget that you have an external battery. You are tethered to this damn thing. In the ideal case that you have like a battery holster or something in your belt, you can kind of make it okay. But in the practical ways that you want to use this thing, when you actually live with a headset like this for months, there's often going to be times where, you're not in a position where you can actually find somewhere to the left of you to put it. Maybe you're not in clothes that have pockets at the time. Maybe, to be frank, if you live alone, maybe you're just in boxers or just, naked or whatever, like whatever clothing you happen to be in. If you are a woman, lots of women's clothing don't have pockets at all. So, like, you're going to find somewhere to the side of you to put it on, like a side table or kind of awkwardly on the chair. But so often you're going to find you accidentally knock it off and thug, you get pulled down to the side by this 350-gram thing that you've just pushed away. If you want to walk or bout with it, right, you kind of like awkwardly put it behind you and kind of, it's so great in principle, but in practicality, you never forget that cable. And there is something magical about being able to just pick up a Quest 3 and put it on your head, and that's it. Not having, every time I pick up the Vision Pro, it's a whole song and dance of where do I want to put this battery based on where I might be moving in the next half an hour. If I need to get up and grab something, if I need to like lean over and grab something here, am I going to accidentally pull it out of my pocket or slide it off the table? It does suck. Unfortunately, like, these are the 3 options. There's no magic solution, or is there? Or is there? Something that I have been a proponent of for a long time now that I haven't seen any shipping headset do is option 4. Another place to put the battery, which, correct me if I'm wrong, commenters, but doesn't have any of these trade-offs, in the side. So already Vision Pro has these big audio pods, as they call them. Why couldn't we put the battery in the side, 2 batteries. So there's a headset that shows you what like this could sort of look like in a maximalist way, though it doesn't actually use batteries, and it's Flamera. So here is me wearing Meta's Flamera prototype. Now, in this case, they're using this to cool certain components on the side. So this isn't using the battery. But tell me, why couldn't we have a headset that has this form factor, but the sides, instead of cooling, because this is using it for unrelated reasons we don't need to talk about here, have the battery? Why? Like, who does it hurt to have more bulk on the sides of the headset? Like, what's the trade-off here? Am I missing something? Why couldn't we do this? Like, you could have every advantage that I just gave with none of the trade-offs and have it on the side. Let's see if there's any comments here. Yeah, Lewis Gumson pointing out that you can take the compute off without taking the battery off. You can have a wireless puck with a battery and then the headset with a battery. That's obviously what Meta's Orion does. You're still going to be limited by the fact that the puck's stuck in. If it wants to be pocketable, you're limiting the compute very, very heavily there. The other issue is you still do need like a decent battery and hardware to do the decoding on the other side, right? You're still trying to do real-time decoding. You still have to do the tracking. Wayne Lynch is saying, what about the top of your head? Hairstyles. A lot of hairstyles, that's not going to suit, right? Even the idea of a top strap. One of the reasons Apple didn't go with a front to back top strap is to support as many hairstyles as possible. Not only to support, like a lot of people just don't want to wear stuff that ruins their hair. And that may sound frivolous, but it does matter if we want this to be a mainstream technology. That's another reason that open periphery designs matter so much, right? I'm always ranting about open periphery. If you don't know what that means, it just means that you don't have a face pad that's covering like your cheeks and the area to the side of your eyes. You just have an open view of below you and to the side of you. And a reason that that's going to be very important is not only because it makes you feel less constrained and it's kind of ideal for mixed reality where the darkness isn't helping you in any way, right? In mixed reality pass-through, you just want to see the real world anyway. This is the Samsung headset, for example, where it has an open periphery design by default, as you can see here. But it also matters a lot for some women who say that they don't want to always have to wear a headset if it's going to ruin their makeup or other kind of face cosmetics and other non-women people who wear makeup as well. The point being, with an open periphery design, you're not actually pushing against the face anymore. And it also kind of has advantages for that VR face, as we call it, right? How often you come out of the headset and your face is all red because you've had to tighten it too much. That'll get less and less of a problem as they're less heavy and you don't have to tighten them as much anyway. But an open periphery design solves this. And of course, to be clear, for your VR gaming, your immersive VR, you still can clip on side clippers, right? Like open periphery doesn't mean only open periphery. It means open periphery by default. You clip on magnetic clips on the side in the Samsung headset, for example, to go full immersion anytime. But when you do just want to watch a movie or have your virtual screens or do some mixed reality stuff that's not those two use cases, this is going to be one of the most important changes to make headsets mainstream. The feeling of this is dramatically better for regular people that are just using the virtual screens use case. And it's something that already exists, right? Quest Pro had it. The problem is that Quest Pro's pass-through was so bad that you didn't really want to use mixed reality on Quest Pro in the first place. So there's kind of a kind of massive flaw there. The other thing is, of course, there are a lot of third-party interfaces for Quest 3 and 3S that do this, and a first-party one as well from Meta, which is like a really novel design. If you have a Quest 3 and you're interested in this open periphery idea, you should definitely give that one a try. It's I'll see if I can find an image of it here, but it's a really, really novel design. I'll have a little look at the comments here because I realize we're going all over the place. Biggs echoing that hair and makeup are a real challenge. Yeah, they really are. For again, if you don't care about these technologies being mainstream, okay, whatever, that's okay. If you do, these are things that really need to be addressed. Even if you don't think you care, by the way, the advantages of this technology going mainstream is there's more investment into the content that you care about, because a wider market means you can have bigger budgets for things. So I think even people that don't think they care do care. Brandon Jones pointing out that the trade-off of having the batteries on the side is construction complexity and additional wiring, possibly peak power throughput. Yeah, there are trade-offs to it, but I think it probably would really, really be worth it. A really interesting one, by the way, that I haven't covered is Play for Dream. So they have both. They have a battery in the rear that lasts for 1 hour, a 1 hour battery in the rear of the strap, and then they also have an external battery to add another 2 hours. So you can use the headset for up to 1 hour at a time without ever putting on the external battery, but then you can also use it without it. So that's an interesting one. I'd love to see that done with the visor, right? Like, not the visor, the product, the visor, this front part. Put a battery in the front that lasts 1 hour for simple tasks, and then let the users add their own battery however they want. External, rear of the strap. That would be super interesting. You could kind of argue that Meta does this already with Quest, right? It's 2 hours or so, but you could argue that, like, if you are a power user, you can add an external battery. This is the thing, right? With a headset that has the battery in the visor, you can still add an external battery. No one's stopping you from putting a battery in your pocket and powering your Quest 3 that way. It's just that you can use it without it. And I think people really overestimate how much the battery of the Quest 3 actually weighs, right? People have this idea that, right, the visor of the Quest 3, if you take off like straps and facial interface, it's 400 and something grams, right? And people have this idea that, like, most of that must be from the battery. It's not. Firstly, just before we get into this is the open interface for Quest 3 you can get from Meta officially. Really, really interesting design. It's like a weird, it's not a Halo strap, but it has a open interface, which is kind of cool. Very cheap and simple way to do it for an existing headset. You should definitely try that out if you use mixed reality a lot. Let's see if I can find this image of the battery. So before I say that, I'll just point out the battery of the Quest 3 weighs somewhere between 60 and 70 grams. So of the 400 and something of the headset, only 60 or 70 grams is the battery. You can maybe argue that's significant, right? Like, it gets you down to 300 and something. But, like, that's not the difference here between Quest 3 and Big Screen Beyond. It's not the battery. It's not, like, that's kind of a misconception that people have, that it's super duper heavy. So for now, I don't think, like, the battery in the visor is the sin that some people think it is. And the convenience, again, is just incredible. Like, again, when I'm using a Vision Pro a lot, it's a breath of fresh air to just be able to pick up the Quest 3, put it in my head, and that's it. Like, not having to think about that battery, it's such a friction point, right? We talk about friction, standalone headsets making friction less. That external battery in Apple Vision Pro is a huge friction point. It really, really is. Let's see the other comments we have here. Jack B says, I remember when we attacked the side blockers on the Quest Pro, but few of us had realized the wisdom after using it. Yeah, that's right. And I'll take some flack for that. I did attack it at the time. I really did. But I would point out that, in my defense, the pass-through was so bad that it didn't matter, right? Like, you didn't want to use mixed reality on Quest Pro. It just, like, the pass-through was awful. It really, really was bad. It was like a quarter of the angular resolution of Quest 3, and it was black and white colorized. So they had two black and white cameras that were creating the actual image, and then a central single mono color camera that was colorizing it, but, like, in a really crude way, so you could see the color trailing the black and white. It was truly bizarre. I mean, props to the Meta engineers who figured out how to do color pass through that way. There was obviously constraints around the chipset they were using, which was, by the time Quest Pro came out, was years old, and they just didn't have, like, a very clever solution. If you're saying, make this work with eye tracking and face tracking and color pass through on this chip, but thank goodness we don't have to do that anymore, and we have chips that are much more capable of handling this. Let's have a look. The comments. A lot of people bring up their ideas for batteries. A battery necklace. Meta did explore that for the Orion prototype glasses, actually. There was some reporting about that. Meta, I think, even admitted it. Actually, they explored that, but that's an interesting idea, but you kind of don't really get as big a battery then, especially having to have it kind of either curved or use lots of small different batteries. But it's an interesting idea in itself. Christian Eccles saying, I have an Apple Vision Pro and it's quite panicky feeling of wearing Vision Pro, standing up to move rooms and have the battery pack fling all over the place. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I think that we will see, I've said this before in this show, but I think we're going to see two different kinds of headsets emerge. I think from what we have today, where we have these headsets, they're kind of jack of all trades, we're going to see a kind of divergence in two directions. And they're going to share some characteristics. They're going to use lenses and panels and pass through the real world with cameras. But one class of headset is going to stay quite like what we have today with Quest 3 and Vision Pro, where the compute's going to be in the headset. In many cases, the battery is going to be in the headset or in the rear, in some cases external. But it's going to be mostly in the headset and in the rear so that you can have this one singular product, a headset you put on your head, and that's it. And that means that you can use it just as easily seated as standing. It is a jack of all trades. But again, you do have a weight issue there that is always, you're never going to be able to get as light and thin as a headset that offloads it. So while we have these headsets that are just going to be, iterative improvements on what we have with the basic architecture of Quest 3, but again, it will get lighter, it will get thinner, but not like dramatically. It'll get like progressively. Then you'll have another direction. And these headsets will offload more and more. Apple Vision Pro offloads the battery. We will see headsets that offload the compute. They will. But because of that, and as I discussed before, they're actually going to have less compute. So these headsets that keep the compute on board are going to be more for gaming, for highly immersive experiences, the things that we mostly in this audience do today. These headsets that go off in this other direction, that offload the compute, that try to get as thin and light as possible, that are open periphery, they're trying to kind of emulate AR glasses. And so they're going to be focused on virtual screens. They're going to be focused on giving you your enormous 3D movie that James Cameron wants, your Apple Mac virtual display, your triple screen Windows laptop setup, right? Your laptop screen turns off and pops out and you've got 3 giant screens instead. You're wearing on a plane, you're wearing on a train, you've replaced your monitors on your desk and have whatever setup you want, or you're in bed with your keyboard and mouse, you're out in your scenic garden or whatever. Those headsets are going to be designed around those use cases, and so they'll have less outright compute. They're not going to be for running Batman Arkham Shadow at 4K 120 frames per second. That's not going to be what they're optimized for, even if they kind of maybe can run some VR games too if you want. But that's going to be the kind of design space. So you're not going to get both in one. You're going to either go for, I care about compute at the cost of weight and bulk, or I care about weight and bulk at the cost of compute. And these headsets are going to be separate. And I think you're going to see probably Meta eventually, we're talking on the time scale of years, these are going to be separate product lines, right? You're going to have, maybe they do just call it Quest Air or something, but maybe they call it something different, right? Maybe you do have your Quests and then you have a Meta something else and it's still running Horizon OS, but maybe it only runs the 2D panels of Horizon OS. Maybe it doesn't run the whole thing. Who knows? The point is that the design constraints here are such that these are going to be, you can easily see how these are separate things that aren't the same exact device, even though they're going to share a lot of similarities in their architecture. Here we go. More comments here. Chester Meadows, one day a company will bring out a game-changing headset that will then be before and after, a bit like the release of the iPhone. Oh, sorry, a bit like the release of the PS1. Sorry, I misread that comment there. Yeah, you could argue that I don't think there's any single headset that does that. I think you're going to see a series of headsets that do that over time. So if you talk about the scale of decades back when VR was useless and mostly sucked for most of the 20th century, people say VR has been around for a long time, but it sucked. I cannot tell you how bad the headsets of the 20th century were. You would you really wouldn't believe how bad they are. There's no way I could convey just how bad they are. VR only got good in the 2010s. There was nothing before that was any good. So you could argue that like the Oculus Rift DK1 was one of those moments where there was the Rift DK1 and there was before and there was after. You could then say that like, there was the Rift and HTC Vive, but I think the real moment that we've seen so far is Quest 2, where the combination of standalone performance, right? The XR2 Gen 1 was the first standalone chip that could really impress people, even though it's not great. It wasn't like, it didn't suck. Like Quest 1, the chip sucked. Okay, like you could do some VR, but it was very, very heavily compromised by compute. Quest 2 is the first time you start to see like this could be good. Standalone could be good. The resolution's high enough now that you're not constantly distracted by screen door effect. It's aesthetic. Quest 2 is a nicer looking headset than Quest 3, arguably. The content starts to arrive there. Quest 2 is that moment, right? And so there's before and after Quest 2. Quest 2 sells orders of magnitude more than any other headset ever, right? Like any other real headset. PlayStation VR 1, I guess, sold maybe a third of what Quest 2 sold. So maybe you get that there. But the point is that nothing reached the mainstream like Quest 2. I think from a capability perspective, Apple Vision Pro was also a before and after moment. Seeing 4K micro OLED and eye tracking for gaze and pinch, those two things are like before and after. I don't think there will ever be another headset from a big company that doesn't have gaze and pinch interaction. And I don't think you'll see a headset over $1,000 from any company that isn't micro OLED anymore, right? Like those things are just, once you go back, once you get that, nobody could ever go back from those two things, especially for the kind of media use cases. So, but yeah, you're right to say that there's still a lot to be needed. And I think once you do get this headset, right, that does offload compute, that is thin and light, that is genuinely comfortable to wear for 3 hours at a time, but is standalone, a computer and a puck is still standalone. There is going to be that moment with open periphery. There is that moment where people get what they've kind of dreamed about with AR glasses, but in a headset. Because I think a lot of what people want from like just having, virtual screens and such on a device that's comfortable to wear that they think is going to come in glasses will actually come in headsets. Maybe these headsets will be so thin and light that we call them VR glasses or something. Like it doesn't matter what you call them. Again, going back to that earlier discussion about does it matter what the bird is called or does it matter what the bird does? It doesn't matter what you call it. The point is that these headsets will be able to deliver something you can wear for multiple hours. That matters for people. That's the kind of thing that then you start to go on an international flight and see dozens of them on a plane, if it's at the right price point, to be clear. That's the other thing. Once you get that at a decent price point, if you could do a headset that was Apple Vision Pro quality with significantly better comfort, open periphery, and at a really good price, under $1,000 or $1,000 at most, yeah, I think that's a moment where there's a before and after. A lot of comments. Big saying, Dactyl Nightmare was awesome. Clayman also bringing up virtuality, headset the size of a CRT TV. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the ones that sucked. I'm sorry. It was like $100,000. It ran at like 15 frames per second. It had like a 40-degree field of view. It was like 200 by 200 per eye or something like that. It's just unthinkably bad, but like, it was cool that they made them. I'm really like impressed that they could do that back in the 90s, but it just like they sucked, right? Like, and that matters. Like, there's a reason VR didn't take off until recently. LL says, I disagree. AR glasses will replace VR, and then in brackets, parentheses, just trying to get him to pull out the chart again. Don't make me pull out the damn chart. Okay. Jack B pointing out the Virtual Boy. Yeah. The Virtual Boy, I guess, wasn't really VR. You can argue about that, but it was kind of just like a 3D console thing. Very cool in itself, but not really VR. Chester Meadows echoing how terrible it was, saying they remember trying VR in an arcade in London back in the 90s, I assume. It was horrendous. Yeah, it really, really was. I think we're pretty close to the end of this show now. We're just going to keep going through a few more comments. Yeah, James O'Loughlin echoing that Quest 2 was groundbreaking from like a mainstream perspective, and Apple Vision Pro was groundbreaking from a capability perspective. That's true. Biggs says hand tracking is the default input wins out. I don't think so. If you mean hand tracking is in directly interacting with your hands like this, because of a phenomenon called gorilla arm, it gets really uncomfortable to hold your hands up like your arms up like this forever. It's why touchscreen interfaces that are like on monitors that are in front of you like this don't really work. Why do you want to keep your hands rested using a mouse and keyboard? Why do you, I'm trying to think of a better analogy here. Yeah, the gorilla arm thing makes direct touch interfaces. Even when you like use VR controllers, notice that a lot of the time you're kind of down like this, right? You have the controllers down here. Your default isn't this. Like if you're kind of like directly keeping your arms up, that gets fatiguing. Try it if you don't believe me. If you're sitting here watching the podcast and not doing anything else with your hands, hold your arms up like this and see how long you can hold them up while pretending to touch a virtual keyboard without it getting uncomfortable. The lack of effort needed, again, I might be completely misinterpreting you, Biggs. You might have just meant gaze and pinch, but I'm just going off on this tangent anyway. The lack of effort in gaze and pinch is why it's so good. You can keep your hands completely rested, no exertion, and just look with your eyes and pinch. Now, this isn't great for high velocity input, right? It's not great for a virtual keyboard. You don't want to look and tap because that's fatiguing for your eyes. But if we're talking about these use cases of you just need to control some virtual interfaces to bring up the movie you're watching, you just need to, resize your virtual display for your laptop. It's so much easier to just do this with eye tracking and hand tracking combined, gaze and pinch. Every company's going to copy this. Android XR is copying it. Samsung headset will have gaze and pinch. Meta, I could almost guarantee you will have it in Quest 4 and or Puffin. The industry is going to converge around this. Once you try Apple Vision Pro, it's very, very clear that this is the default interaction. Default being the key method. Again, it's not great for it's not going to replace immersive gaming. Obviously not. Keyboard is a perfect example. You're still going to want to raise your hands up for keyboard or ideally use a Bluetooth keyboard. But when it comes to just selecting an interface, changing a setting, opening something up, dismissing a notification, all of this 10 times easier with eye tracking than it is with just hand tracking. Chester Meadows saying the Quest 3 is where I consider it to be over the line of actually good enough. I agree with that. I think the Quest 3 is underrated for where it is as a threshold. I've said this before. The Quest 3 is the first great Meta standalone headset. It's the first, it passes a quality threshold that none of the Quests before it did in a meaningful way that I would recommend it to someone. I would kind of be a little bit it's not there yet. But the combination of those really clear and sharp lenses, the thinner design that allows the lower moment of inertia so it feels lighter, and the color pass-through that lets you still continue to see the real world. And obviously, while you're waiting for game updates and installs and people to join the group chat, while you're in your real environment, you're not cut off. The fact that you can do all that, that really crosses the threshold to the point where it's very, very clear why Meta has said the Quest 3 has higher retention than any of the previous headsets, notably higher. It does pass this quality threshold. The other thing is the controllers. People never say, the controllers are so much better. Why do I say that? The rings. One of the things I hated about Quest 2 and all of the other headsets that have these rings is that if you're doing a game where you're doing complicated two-handed interactions, either between hand, or say you're reloading a rifle or doing something like connecting things, so often you're bashing plastic rings that you can't even see in VR together. That's horrible. And I'm so glad that we have these ringless controllers now. That's a huge upgrade. The controllers no one really talks about that enough, but the controllers are a massive upgrade. Looking through more and more of the comments here. Michael Grant saying, but I'm still going off in this tangent anyway as a mood. Yep, I'm unhinged. There's no one here to reel me back in. I do have to go soon, though, to be fair. Let me just check the time. Yep, I definitely have to go soon. Yeah. Okay, so I think we've had a great discussion here. A lot of great comments, really, really interesting discussion. I would not have time to read them all out. I've been baited into one question here. If I if I was in charge, what would I prioritize in Quest 4? Let's forget let's forget about that and say, what do I expect from Quest 4? There was a comment earlier in the show that I forgot to address, which asked, will we see Quest 4 this year? No, almost certainly not. All signs point to next year, so a year and a half from now. We are still in the era of Quest 3 and Quest 3S. We're still about halfway through the era of Quest 3 and Quest 3S. It will be another year and a half until I expect to see a Quest 4. What do I expect to see from Quest 4? Slightly thinner and lighter, but not dramatically so. Significantly better pass-through. More than 2x effective compute, because the GPU will probably be about twice the performance. Again, we've seen that in each Quest. Quest 2 had a GPU that was twice as powerful as Quest 1. Quest 3 had a GPU twice as powerful. Quest 4 will probably have the same, but I also expect it to have neural upscaling and eye-tracked foveated rendering. And so the actual force multiplier there means that for immersive VR and MR, it may actually be effectively 3 or 4 times more performant, which is crazy. In addition to that, eye tracking. So slightly thinner and lighter, much better pass through, much better performance on the GPU side specifically. Probably better CPU as well, actually, maybe even those Qualcomm Orion cores, but who knows, that's speculative. And yeah, eye tracking, which means you can get the gaze and pinch. So foveated rendering, great. Driving your avatar eyes in VR chat, great. But for someone just wanting to use this as a giant virtual monitor and do simple interactions and things like that, general computing, gaze and pinch, look with your eyes, pinch with your fingers, is going to be massive to see come to a $500 range device. I don't know what Quest 4 is going to cost. Could be more than that. I'm just talking, plus or minus hundreds of dollars there. Yeah. So yeah, just to be clear, we expect 2 years between Quest 2 and Quest 3. Sorry, 3 years between Quest 2 and Quest 3. 3 years between Quest 3 and Quest 4. 2020, 2023, 2026. Randy Call saying the Play for Dream controllers are ringless. Yeah, Quest 3 is not the only headset that has that. Play for Dream, Pico 4 Ultra. It looks like Valve Deckard will have ringless controllers. The whole industry is doing it. I'm just saying it was a massive upgrade over the previous ringless controllers. Dutch Tiger is saying, I can't wait for Deckard. The Index was great. I put it on last time, and gosh, it's so comfortable to wear. Yep, a great point there with Index is that a headset can be heavy and still comfortable if you have premium materials, good balance. And again, you can't lean back and watch a movie, but that's not what Index is optimized for. So if you do have the battery in the rear or no battery at all, you can still make a comfortable headset while it's heavy. That's a whole tangent of its own, though. A lot of comments here. Jack B saying that I imagine the Quest general release hinges more on when a new chip comes out. Yep, that's absolutely right. The fundamental driver of progress in standalone VR is the chipsets. The pass-through of Quest 3 being color, it's not the cameras that got better. I mean, yeah, they put in color cameras, but like they would have added not that much cost to Quest 2. It was that the chip was not capable of properly handling color pass-through, as we saw when they tried to do it in Quest Pro. So the chips allowed that. The chips are what allow all of the kind of aspects to get better. The depths, the software level depth sensing, right? The scene mesh that they generate. Why couldn't they do that on Quest Pro? The chip wasn't good enough. The chip in Quest 3 and 3S can do it despite being a fraction of the price of a headset compared to Quest Pro. Same thing with like hand tracking getting better, other tracking getting better, right? People don't realize that the head tracking got better between Quest 1, 2, 3, more power on the chip. Other kind of things like the arbitrary keyboard tracking, the fact that it can now track any kind of keyboard and cut it out, all of those things, better chip, better capabilities, inside out upper body tracking. It's not that the cameras are in a better position, but the Quest Pro had quite similar camera positions too. Why can't Quest Pro do it? It doesn't have a good chip. The chips are the fundamental driver of progress. Even like when it comes to the displays, there's no point in many cases of having a higher and higher resolution display if you were still stuck with the chips of 10 years ago. You need the chip to get better. The fundamental driver is the chip. So yes, these are all centered around the chipset. And as Dundam said, it's kind of up to Qualcomm, right? Yeah, Qualcomm is one of Meta's most important partners, if not their single most important partner. Meta works very close with Qualcomm on the XR series of chips. They literally have engineers going between the companies. Like physically, there are Qualcomm engineers in Meta and Meta engineers at Qualcomm working on this together. It's a very, very close partnership. Big saying double Quest 3 performance plus dynamic Foveated rendering would be incredible. Yep, I really think Quest 4 has the potential to be the biggest performance increase yet. And if you add neural upscaling, things going to be beyond our wildest expectations. So many comments here, but we are definitely going to have to go off now. I have a lot of stuff to handle here. Clayman is saying, my arms are really hurting now, gorilla arms bad. Yeah, if you were playing the game of holding your arms up, by now you'll see exactly why floating interfaces that you directly touch with your fingers are not the future, other than for quick settings changes. If you want to do hours and hours of navigating an OS, you need something that doesn't exert your arms like that. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to have to go now. Thanks so much. Thanks again to our members and patrons. Great discussion this week. I think maybe Ian will be back next week, but I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to get information from Ian from that. Onakazi is saying, so much for the short stream. Yes. How many times have we said that this is going to be a short one this week, and then 3 hours later, we're like, oh God, what happened? That is the fun of the VR download. We love coming in here, even when we shouldn't really, from a time management perspective, come in here and talk to you. We still love doing it anyway. We love directly talking to the audience, hearing your feedback, discussing this out loud with you, thinking it through. It's great stuff. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Thanks for the high quality of the comments. Thanks again for keeping it civil, even in the heated potential discussion about US politics, or tangential to US politics, I guess. Thanks so much, everyone. We will see you in the future.